Yep, we're live now, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Welcome to this virtual hearing of inquiry into the budget estimates 2021-22. Before I commence, it's the custom of this Parliament to acknowledge the traditional inhabitants of this land, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and I do so with all due respect, as well as acknowledging the other important contributors to the history of this site. We acknowledge and thank them all. Today, the committee will examine the proposed expenditure for the portfolios of education and early childhood learning. Today's hearing is being conducted as a fully virtual hearing, which enables the work of the committee to continue during the COVID-19 pandemic without compromising health and safety. I would ask for everyone's patience through any technical difficulties we may encounter today. I apologise also for the late start due to one of those technical difficulties here, at least in my Parliament House office. So thank you for your perseverance, and thank you for the witnesses appearing today, led by Georgina Harrison from the Department of Education, who we congratulate very much, given her appointment as Secretary, appearing before our committee for the first time in that very important role, and all her staff, and also Paul Martin, the head of NHSA. Thank you all very much. Before I commence, I'd like to make some brief statements about the procedures. There may be some questions that a witness could only answer if they had more time or with certain documents. Please take those on notice, as we've done in the past. You have a right to procedural fairness, as we've noted in the past, and today's proceedings are being broadcast live from Parliament's YouTube channel, and a transcript will be placed on the committee's website once it becomes available. Finally, a few notes of a virtual hearing etiquette to minimise disruptions and assist our Hansard reporters. Can I ask committee members to clearly identify who their questions are being directed to, and everyone can state their name at the beginning of their presentation, so that Hansard knows who's actually speaking. Could everyone please mute their microphones when they're not speaking? Please remember to turn your microphones back on when you're getting ready to speak. Please don't speak over each other, because it's hard enough as it is. And to assist Hansard, may I remind members and witnesses to speak directly into the microphone and avoid making comments when your head is turned away. Witnesses to be sworn in, first starting with Ms. Harrison. Could you please state your full name, position, title and swear either an oath or affirmation from the cards that have been emailed to you by the Secretariat? Thank you, Georgina.
Certainly, I will just need to draw up those cards if you could give me 1 second. While I do that, my name is Georgina Harrison. I'm the Secretary of the New South Wales Department of Education. And I'm sorry I don't have to hand the oath card. Let me just see if I can get that up. Apologies. I'm sorry, my system is being very slow.
Could we go to Ms. Owen then, please?
Apologies, I have it now if you'd like me to proceed.
Thank you. Ms. Harrison.
I swear that the evidence now about to be given by me shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Thank you very much. Ms. Owen, please.
Hello, this is Ruth Owen. I'm the Acting Group Deputy Secretary for School Improvement and Education Reform. I solemnly, sincerely and truly declare and affirm that the evidence now about to be given by me shall be the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth.
Thank you. Mr. Withy, please.
Thank you, Chair. My name is David Withy. I am the Chief Operating Officer here at the New South Wales Department of Education. I solemnly, sincerely and truly declare and affirm that the evidence now about to be given by me shall be the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth.
Thank you. Mr. Manning, please.
Anthony Manning, Chief Executive School Infrastructure within the Department of Education. I solemnly, sincerely and truly declare and affirm that the evidence now about to be given by me shall be the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth.
Thank you. Mr. Disdar, please.
Thanks, Chair. Murat Disdar, Deputy Secretary, School Performance, New South Wales Department of Education. I solemnly, sincerely and truly declare and affirm that the evidence now about to be given by me shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Thank you. Mr. Martin, please.
Thank you, Chair. My name is Paul Martin. I'm the CEO of the New South Wales Education Standards Authority. I solemnly, sincerely and truly declare and affirm that the evidence now about to be given by me shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Ms. Kajia, please. You can hear me. I'm having trouble. I've lost my audio.
I can hear you, Chair. Thank you. I'm Yvette Catchia. I'm the Chief People Officer at the New South Wales Department of Education. I solemnly, sincerely and truly declare and affirm that the evidence now about to be given by me shall be the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth.
Okay. Can anyone hear me? Yep, that's good. Okay. Thank you to the witnesses. Today's hearing will be conducted from 9:30 to 11 a.m. and from 11:15 to 12:45 with questions from the opposition and crossbench members only. If required, an additional 15 minutes is allocated at the end of the hearing for government questions. As there is no provision for any witness to make an opening statement before the committee commences questioning, we'll begin with questions from the opposition, please.
Thanks very much, Chair, and good morning to everyone. Ms. Harrison, can I start with you? The question that everybody wants to know, when will our children return to school?
Thank you for the question, Ms. Houssos. I think the Premier has indicated her intention to make announcements about the return to school by the end of this week. If those announcements occur during this hearing, then I would be happy to provide further information to the committee at that time.
Well, Ms. Harrison, it was reported on Channel 7 and Channel 9 News last night that this may happen this year, that Kindy, Year 1 and Year 11 students may be prioritised and that it may be part-time. How can you provide some clarity to this committee about the work that you've been doing in relation to that?
So certainly I understand the call for clarity from the community. As a working parent myself with children at home, I understand the challenges that families across the state are experiencing at the moment. And as I've indicated, the Premier has said that she will make announcements about the planned return to school. And once she has done so, I'll be happy to provide you with further information.
Well, perhaps, Ms. Harrison, you can provide some clarity on whether it was reported earlier this week that the return to school will be contingent on the rates of community vaccination reaching 70%. Will that be the case?
So I'm not sure it would be helpful for me to comment on speculation in the media prior to what the government announces in terms of its back to school plan.
Ms. Harrison, is there any insight that you can provide to us before 11 o'clock this morning about the plans that the department has been working on to return our children to school?
I can assure the committee that the department has been working very closely with the Department of Health and being led as ever by the health advice in terms of our response to the pandemic, and I can provide information to you once the Premier has made her announcements.
All right, I might move on. Ms. Harrison, can you provide any clarity on the work that is being done to improve ventilation in New South Wales schools?
And so Mr. Manning will have some further detail on this. We have continued to work with New South Wales Health on the most up-to-date guidance in relation to ventilation as it pertains to the current COVID situation. We have taken that advice and shared that advice with our schools, and Mr. Manning could provide you with some more detail on that.
Yes, thank you, Secretary. As the Secretary said, throughout the COVID pandemic, we have been led by the expertise with New South Wales Health in terms of the most appropriate response to operating our schools in a safe manner. This position will continue and is evidenced by the fact that we've made significant increases in cleaning of schools and environmental cleans, along with direct provision of hand sanitizer and PPE. And the ventilation levels in classrooms is just one of a number of layers of things, such as vaccinations and wearing masks, and we'll continue to follow the advice. The current advice from health is to maximise ventilation where possible, and if possible, enhanced by mechanical means. The vast majority of our schools have classrooms with openable windows that allow for natural ventilation to occur when open. These classrooms are sized to not need to be cross-ventilated, so the ventilation can come from a single elevation. And our maintenance program has always included an element to ease and adjust windows to ensure that they are operable. We'll work with schools to ensure that windows are able to be open and will remain open during the day. There are a limited number of schools that are fully air conditioned and therefore mechanically ventilated. We've already undertaken a clean of any filtering systems, and we'll continue to monitor these filters and clean them and replace them as necessary. I'd also like to add that many of our classrooms are fitted with either ceiling or wall-mounted fans to assist with airflow within classrooms. And again, this will work in conjunction with open windows to improve the ventilation. So they're the components that are all recommended by New South Wales.
I'll stop you there. So essentially what you're saying is you've cleaned the air conditioning units as they should be, and that you're encouraging people to open windows. There's a lot of work that's been done internationally around monitoring air quality control, around monitoring the rates of carbon dioxide in classrooms. Have you done any of that preparatory work, or are we just telling schools to keep their windows open?
So I would
just going to raise a point of order at that point. The member hadn't actually finished his answer, and I think that it's vitally important, particularly during these virtual hearings, that members are permitted to complete their full answer before other members ask for an elucidation.
Mr. Shoebridge, on the point of order.
Look, these WebEx hearings are difficult enough. I think if the member, in this case, allowed quite a lengthy answer to go on and then indicated at a reasonable point where the member wanted to move on. And if we're going to have repeated points of order on WebEx, this will really potentially melt down. I think the member was perfectly within her rights to do what she did in a respectful way that she did.
Well, it's very hard on these virtual hearings to do anything other than ask people to move on. So, you know, we're always short of time. So if the witness could finish the answer, and then Ms. Houssos could resume her questioning, please.
So for Hansard, it's Georgina Harrison. I would just refer the member to our previous answer. We have sought health advice and followed health advice in relation to ventilation advice for our schools.
Right. Perhaps provide a copy of that advice on notice, if that's possible. I'm going to move on to schools that have actually had positive cases of COVID there recently. How many schools have been deep cleaned in the last week because they've had COVID cases on their grounds?
Thank you, Ms. Houssos, and I would like to give credit to every member of our school community who have experienced these cases and these requirements in their schools. Mr. Disdale will be able to provide you details of the numbers.
Thanks for the community view at this, Ms. Houssos. I don't have the last week in front of me, but it might be helpful if I tell you what I do have in front of me. I've got from June to 27 August, which is as of this morning, we have had 88 government schools that we have had to make non-operational for a day or two at a time because there's been a positive COVID case in that school community, and we've had to work with New South Wales Health to undertake close contact tracing and the thorough cleaning in line with health requirements.
Thanks, Mr. Tisdale. Do you have a breakdown of those that have occurred in August?
We could provide that for you, but like I said, the data in front of me is from June to this morning.
Okay, and do you have a number of students that were affected?
The number of students affected, do you mean by way of close contacts, Ms. Houssos?
Yes.
That's health data that I don't have.
Okay. All right, I'm going to move on to the question of the $337 million tutoring package that was announced by the government last year. Ms. Harrison, how is this currently being provided while students are learning at home?
It's Georgina Harrison for Hansard. Thank you for the question, Ms. Houssos. Our schools have done a phenomenal job this year in recruiting and deploying additional tutors to support the intensive learning support for students following last year's interrupted pattern of learning. Our schools have continued to provide that support through the learning from home restrictions, and Mr. Disdar can give you some examples of ways that schools have been approaching that through this learning from home period.
Ms. Houssos, the $337 million COVID intensive learning support program has been really well received by our school communities. I just note for the committee that it's additional funding on top of the funding that a school would normally receive. I have a fine example of at Taree High School, for example, with Alison Alliston, our principal. They received an additional $472,000 for this year. And they have identified 150 students in their school who are behind in their stage level of literacy and numeracy. They have employed 6 additional teaching staff at that school to develop and enact individual learning plans that are focused on literacy and numeracy for these learners. And for the committee, quite pleasingly, with the challenges of learning from home, these support classes are still being conducted online at Taree High School for those 150 learners. And the school is monitoring their progress in line with syllabus outcomes. I mean, I've got numerous examples like this, but
thanks very much, Mr. Disdar.
Really well received.
Yes, and I too pay tribute to the many teachers who are working across the sector at the moment, going above and beyond to provide their lessons in a very difficult environment. I also pay tribute to the parents who are trying to juggle home schooling and work as well. And of course, our students who continue to make the best of it. Ms. Harrison, what central oversight is there of this COVID support package?
Thank you. So we have had a detailed programme plan and support provided to schools in relation to the intensive learning support programme. We have an additional 7,336 educators and tutors supporting our students at this time. And Ms. Owen can give you some further detail on the monitoring of that programme through the system.
Sorry, can you just give me that figure again? 3,000?
It was 7,336 additional educators.
7,336. Okay, and do you have a breakdown of how many of those are teachers and not teachers, qualified teachers?
So I would, for the committee's benefit, there are a clear set of guidelines for the recruitment of those tutors and educators, and again, would be able to provide that detail and breakdown on notice. If you wanted further advice on the monitoring, to your first question, Ms. Owen can provide that.
Okay.
Can
Ms.
I
Owen, just a brief.
provide that on notice then?
Oh yes, I will provide the breakdown on notice.
Thank you.
Ruth Owen here for Hansard. I can provide that information if the committee would like me to while we're on record. So 90% of those additional tutors are qualified educators, either current teachers, retired teachers, or future teachers working in universities. The 10% were student learning and support officers who in term 2 we included as part of our tuition programme. Just to come back to your earlier question, Ms. Houssos, we have a COVID intensive learning support program team who continue to work with all the schools across the state to monitor their delivery of the tutoring, to continue to understand where there are challenges and to support every school in making sure every student who needs that catch-up small group tuition gets it. That group also reports into the executive every month, providing us with updates on progress against both the hiring of tutors, provision of tuition, and the spending of the stimulus funding.
Thanks very much, Ms. Owen. Ms. Harrison, I just have one more question before I pass over to my colleague. Can you tell us the latest on the plans for New South Wales schools to implement rapid antigen testing?
So I can assure you that we continue to work with New South Wales Health on all the appropriate measures to ensure our schools are safe places. I don't have any specific details on plans for rapid antigen testing in schools at this time.
So sorry, just to be clear, there's no plans to implement rapid antigen testing on school sites at the moment.
There are currently some pilots underway in some schools, largely in the independent sector. We are monitoring those trials closely, and should it be something that health advise we should be implementing more broadly, we will take that advice and follow that advice.
Okay, but that was announced by the New South Wales Premier that there would be rapid antigen testing in government schools. That is not currently underway, and you don't currently have any plans for that. Is that correct?
So I think the commitment from the Premier you're referring to is around the Year 12 return. Following the initial announcement by the Premier, planning was undertaken by the public school system, the independent school system and the Catholic school system in partnership based on health advice. From that advice, we were able to put in place a series of other measures and restrictions around that return so that it was a safe, controlled and managed return for Year 12 to support their essential learning and wellbeing needs. And in those circumstances, the rapid antigen testing was not a requirement of health for that return.
Okay, I might take up the questioning now and thank everyone for your appearance today. I might first place on the record just a couple of things.
Mr. D'Adam for Hansard.
Sorry, Mr. D'Adam, Labor MLC. I'd like to place on record just a couple of things before I start my questioning. Firstly, that I am my partner is employed in the COVID tutoring support scheme, and I'd also like to declare that my son is currently undertaking the HSC. So just wanted to place those two items on the record. Look, I wanted to ask perhaps Ms. Harrison this question. I wanted to get some clarification about the implications of the current public health orders in relation to the requirement for vaccination for disability and early childcare workers. Now, Education runs a number of on-site preschools, and there's also school learning and support officers employed at schools. Are those SLSOs or those teachers that are engaged with supporting students with a disability, are they captured by that definition in relation to disability support workers, and will they be required to be vaccinated?
Thank you for your question, Mr. D'Adam. And I note for the record that your family is probably feeling it as much as any other in this case, with a Year 12 student, someone trying to support learning from home while delivering learning from home. So appreciate those strains. The requirement under the public health order for early childhood and disability support workers came into effect. I think the public health order was published on Wednesday or Thursday night. We have provided guidance out to our schools on how that impacts on them. I would indicate for the committee's benefit that the best protection we can provide young people unable to be vaccinated at this time is to ensure that the adults that surround them and support them are vaccinated. And Ms. Owen can provide you with some specific details on the requirements for Education Department staff.
Can I just ask also, before we get to go to Ms. Owen, that that advice be provided, the advice that's been circulated to schools be provided to the committee?
Very happy to provide that information on notice.
Thank you, Ruth Owen, speaking for Hansard. Yeah, thank you, Mr. D'Adam. I think it would be worth sharing with the committee on notice the specific details of how we've categorised which members of our workforce are captured by that public health order. As you're suggesting, there are a number of members of our workforce who work with early childhood in our preschools and with students with disabilities. And we've given very clear advice to our schools on which members of staff that applies to, mostly for those who are providing direct support, direct tuition or direct supervision for those students. So that will include, for example, classroom teachers in our support classes. It will include student learning and support officers, as you identified, SLSOs, preschool teachers, teachers within our schools of special purpose, SSPs, and a number of specified other roles, which I will provide to you on notice.
So the effect of that is that those workers will be required to be vaccinated.
Can I clarify that is within the current 12 LGAs of concern? Those workers will be required to be vaccinated, that's correct.
So that's workers who enter that LGA or workers who are living in that LGA who go elsewhere?
It is both, whether you live or work in that LGA.
I see. And so, I mean, obviously, this is a significant issue in terms of the current public debate around mandatory vaccination. And I think there's it's fair to say there is concern amongst the teaching workforce that the government will move to mandate vaccination for teachers. Can you provide some information about your intentions in relation to that question?
So firstly, I can provide for the committee some information in relation to the teaching workforce and current vaccination rates across the state. We carried out a survey of our staff last week and asked them about their current intentions around vaccination. We had around 57,000 people respond, and of those, just over 68% had already received a first dose of vaccination. So we're delighted to report that our teachers are tracking above the general population in terms of accessing a vaccine, because again, I will reiterate, the most important thing the adults in the community can do to protect our children is to get vaccinated.
So can I draw you back to my original question, which is about whether the intention of the department is to extend the requirement for mandatory vaccination to its entire teaching workforce?
I would note that the requirements for mandatory vaccinations are led on health advice and provided by public health orders. And so it is in part really a question for health in relation to whether or not they would deem mandatory vaccinations a requirement for the safe operation of schools.
And have you had discussions with health in relation to that?
I am in discussions with health multiple times a day, as I'm sure the committee would expect me to be.
Okay, at that point, sorry, we need to move to Mr. Shoebridge and keep moving along. Thank you, Mr. Shoebridge.
Oh, thanks, Chair. Thanks, everyone, for coming today. I want to acknowledge the work of all the teachers in particular, but also the work of the staff in the department. It's been an incredible time of uncertainty, and extraordinary efforts have been made, and I want to acknowledge that on behalf of the Greens. Ms. Harrison, do you accept that when parents send their children to school, that there's a fundamental duty of care and an obligation on the school to ensure that the parents know that their kids will be safe and they'll be looked after, and particularly at a time of crisis like this?
Certainly, Mr. Shoebridge, thank you for the question. I think it's important for all of the community to know that our schools should and are as safe as they can be at this time in relation to the risks that are present across the whole community. We have put in a series of additional measures across our schools. No school is operating as any of us would remember. We have teachers wearing masks across Greater Sydney. We have no external visitors arriving into our schools. We have no external provision. We really have taken a series and layered approach of measures to protect our students at this time.
Thanks, Ms. Harrison. I presume that's based upon written advice from New South Wales Health, is it?
We have developed a series of guidelines. You may have seen them on our website that talk about the specific levels of protection we have for COVID safe operations. They run from 1 to now 4+ in the 12 LGAs of concern. Those levels have been developed in consultation with health and agreed by health through the State Emergency Operations Management Centre as part of the state government's response to the overall pandemic.
Have you got written advice from New South Wales Health, which you've used in order to put in place the arrangements you have in schools at the moment? And I assume for future arrangements, have you got written advice from Health?
Health have provided advice on each of the on all of the guidance documents that we have provided. They have asked, of course, questions about the appropriateness of different measures and provided us with advice on where we should strengthen measures or otherwise. So it's been a joint process to develop those guidelines for our schools.
Ms. Harrison, I'm not trying to be tricky here. Have you got that advice in writing from New South Wales Health?
As I've said, I'll refer you to my previous answer. We have developed guidance for our schools in conjunction with health. They have commented and provided their endorsement of those levels and of those guidelines for our schools.
Ms. Harrison, I don't know why you're avoiding answering this question. And I'm going to ask you to actually answer the question. Have you got written advice from New South Wales Health that you have acted upon in response to COVID-19 and the measures you've put in place? Have you got written advice from Health?
So I understand the line of questioning, and I note that it's a line of questioning that has been provided to other witnesses in other estimates hearings. The health advice is provided to Crisis Cabinet. I'm not at liberty to comment on the advice provided to Crisis Cabinet. What I can assure the committee and the parents and students of New South Wales is that we have put in place safe, COVID-safe operational plans based on health advice developed in conjunction with health in order to ensure that our schools are operating in a COVID-safe way.
Ms. Harrison, you say it's based on health advice, and you give the reason for not providing any actual details about the nature of that health advice as Cabinet in confidence. Is that why you're resisting telling us whether or not the advice has been provided in writing? You're relying upon Cabinet in confidence.
So certainly the health advice provided to the government on which it bases its decisions is Cabinet in confidence. I would reiterate, because I think it's really important, we have developed the guidelines for schools in partnership with health. They have endorsed those guidelines, they have reviewed those guidelines, and they have approved them for the use in safe schools. I'm not sure what else I can add at this time.
Ms. Harrison, if you want the parents of students who are very anxious about their kids' health to accept that New South Wales Department of Education is following the health advice and is guided by the health advice, surely the best way of doing that is to be transparent and provide to the people of New South Wales the health advice. Why won't you do that? Is it because there has been compromises, negotiations, and an acknowledgement that the reality of the situation means the
Point of
advice can't
order
be
from
adopted?
Mr. Fang.
Chair, I understand the line of questioning by Mr. Shoebridge, and certainly the first part of that question was robust and appropriate. But I think when he starts going on to the monologue about is it because, and then starts to expand on what he believes it may be, that's outside line of questioning and becomes, I guess, more of an opinion, and that's not permitted.
Well, I'll rule that these have been questions. And could I just say to Ms. Harrison that for the purposes of budget estimate, it's really not acceptable to this committee to think that advice that's provided from one department, health, to another, education, can somehow be regarded as strictly confidential. If it's coming directly from health to the education department, I think Mr. Shoebridge deserves, the committee deserves, and the people of New South Wales deserve a transparent, straight answer as to the nature of that advice. Please.
Apologies, Chair, if I wasn't clear. Our advice is transparent because it is reflected in all of the guidelines that we have published for the safe operations of schools. They are documents we have developed in conjunction and partnership with health. Those documents have been commented on by health officials. They have been reviewed by Kerry Chant. They are absolutely endorsed by health and reflect the health advice for our schools.
So provide us with the evidence that provides any of that. Show us the advice from Kerry Chant that says it's endorsed by New South Wales Health. Show us the comments from New South Wales Health that allow people to assess for themselves rather than simply take you at your word. Why won't you provide that material, Ms. Harrison?
So I think, as I've indicated, that material is transparently available in the guidance that we have provided for schools because that has been worked on with health. I'm not sure that there's anything further that I can add to this line of questioning.
Ms. Harrison, this is about as transparent as a brick. We are in a public health crisis. You will be asking tens of thousands of parents, hundreds of thousands of kids to go back to, tens of thousands of parents to send their kids back to school on the basis that you have got the health advice and acted on the health advice. The only way you will satisfy people's concerns is if you provide the health advice. Don't you accept that transparency is essential at a time like this?
So I understand the calls for transparency. I'm indicating that I think we have been transparent. We have made our guidance publicly available from the beginning. Parents can see the additional measures that we've put in place. They are in line with the measures across the community that are guiding all of our current interactions with other people and under stay-at-home orders. We have done that. We have provided that advice. It is transparent.
Ms. Harrison, it is simply untrue to say that you have provided the advice. You have put the department's guidance on the website. You have provided the department's documents. You have not provided, and you're refusing to provide to this committee, the advice from New South Wales Health. It is simply untrue to say anything different. You are refusing to do it.
There needs to be a question. I'm sorry. There needs to be a question.
Why do you persist in telling this committee that you've been transparent and have provided the advice, when in fact it's exactly the opposite? You're refusing to do it. Why do you say that?
So I am sharing with the committee and trying to assure the parents of New South Wales, I appreciate the challenges, that we have developed advice in line with health guidance, supported by health, reviewed by health, and published on our website. That is what we have done, and so that is the position we're in. And Ms. Owen might be able to provide you some more details in relation to the advice that we have engaged in and the conversations we've engaged in with health. I would also refer you to Dr.
If Ms. Owen will provide the advice, I'm happy to hear from Ms. Owen, but otherwise I have further questions to you, Ms. Harrison.
So if I could finish the sentence I'd started, Dr. Chant, in her evidence earlier this week, indicated that we had been working very closely between the Department of Health and the Department of Education. And so, I think you're hearing that from both myself and from the government's Chief Health Officer. And Ms. Owen might have further details to provide.
Only if Ms. Owen will actually provide the New South Wales health advice. Ms. Owen, will you provide the New South Wales health advice?
Mr. Shoebridge, I'll just draw the committee's attention to the documents that are on our website, which are jointly health and education advice for our schools, for our parents, for the whole school community. So the health advice is within the advice that we have published on our websites. It's jointly branded between New South Wales Health, New South Wales Education. If you refer to them, you'll see the health conditions, which are provided by New South Wales Health, and the educational settings, which are provided by New South Wales Education. So they're joint pieces of advice, which are transparent on our website for all the community.
Ms. Harrison, you answered, in some of your answers to Ms. Houssos, you said that you had received advice from New South Wales Health about ventilation. Do you accept that there are a huge number of challenges given the variety of different classrooms across the public schools in New South Wales, a huge number of challenges in relation to ventilation?
I accept that we have a very varied estate in relation to our schools. I will simply reiterate the advice I have provided to Ms. Houssos. We have sought health advice in relation to ventilation, and we have provided that advice to our school communities.
Thank you.
Sorry,
the time has expired. You'll have to wait for the next round. So if I could just commence my questioning, please, to Ms. Harrison. It's great to hear that you got 57,000 responses to your teacher survey and that 68% of the teachers are already vaccinated at least once. What did the other 32% of the teachers say?
And so Ms. Katcher will have some further details. We also asked our teachers whether or not they were intending to get vaccinated in the next month. And so we have some further details in relation to that Ms. Katcher can provide.
Thank you, Ms. Harrison. Thank you, Chair Yvette Catchia for Hansard. So yes, as the Secretary said, 67% of respondents had had at least one dose. 39% of those respondents had had 2 doses, and 28.2% have had, of those respondents have had, of those respondents rather who'd had 2 had had 1 dose so far, and 31% had had no doses so far. But it's important in that context to then look at intent. And so this survey was voluntary, it was anonymous, so all identification was redacted, and 17% of respondents had 0 doses so far, but do intend to get a vaccination in the next month. 9.4% of respondents had had 0 doses so far, but did not intend to get a vaccine within the next month. Now, bearing in mind that that 9.4% is of the respondents, not of the total workforce. 1.1% of respondents to the survey said that they are unable to get vaccinated, and they would fall into one of the exemptions in the public health order.
Okay, so could I ask, please, how does the department plan to handle the 9.4% who don't intend to be vaccinated within the next month, and assuming there's a significant group of those not vaccinated at all? Would the department support mandatory workplace vaccinations?
Thank you for the question, Chair. I would just comment on that percentage that we asked the question based on intentions to get vaccinated in the next month. We know across the community many hold appointments in October for vaccinations based on when the supply and appointments are available. So I'm not sure we're able to draw any conclusions from that percentage. And I think Ms. Houssos asked some similar questions around mandation of vaccinations. And as I commented at that time, that is a decision for the government, and for, if required, will be a public health order, so therefore a health issue that we will need to respond to.
Okay, but do you acknowledge, Ms. Harrison, it's also a big privacy, work health, safety, and also employment issue? What is the attitude of the Department of Education as the employer?
And so I think Mr. Reardon gave some advice on this issue earlier in the week. Obviously, the community debate around mandation of vaccinations is evolving. I would reiterate my evidence from earlier that the best thing that adults can do to protect our children and ensure that our schools are safe is to go and get vaccinated. So we strongly encourage all of our staff to access an appropriate vaccination for them as soon as they can.
And does the department accept the advice that's been issued by the Fair Work Ombudsman about the rights of workers? In this case, according to the advice, they're quite substantial rights.
We obviously recognise the rights of our workers. I would point the committee in the direction of existing public health orders in relation to mandating of vaccines. They provide a legal basis for vaccinations for the workforces they cover. If there is any move, and I reiterate, if the government was to make a decision to mandate vaccines for teachers, obviously that legal basis would also be required.
Can I just raise the question of student vaccinations? In the Parliament on Wednesday, the Prime Minister, waxing lyrical about returns to freedom and what it means, raised the possibility of a return to school as a freedom for the vaccinated. Will we ever get to the point in New South Wales where only vaccinated students can go to school?
I'm not sure it's helpful for the committee or the community of New South Wales to hypothesise on statements made by the Prime Minister on this issue. I would note that education systems are run, public education systems are run by the state government, and the state government will take appropriate decisions in relation to how those systems operate.
Is it your view that as a universal public education system, no student should ever be locked out of the school for their vaccination status?
So I certainly agree that public education should be available for every student in New South Wales. It's at the very core of what public education is about. And I would note that for many of our students, there is no opportunity to be vaccinated at this time because there is not a vaccine available worldwide for children under 12 years old.
Right. Can you rule out mandatory student vaccination in New South Wales?
I'm not in a position to rule anything in or out. As I've said, we are being led by the health advice, and we will continue to be led by the health advice. I think it is fair to assume there would be no mandatory requirement for students, particularly where there is no vaccine available for a large number of students.
Okay. At the moment, there's a large and obviously significant public campaign for vaccination, but there's also the promise issued by our Premier and also the Prime Minister that in a couple of months' time, when we get to 70 or 80% vaccination rates, as outlined by the Doherty report, we will, as a society across the board, be treating COVID-19 as the equivalent of the flu. Is that also the expectation of the Department of Education as to where we'll get to before the end of this year?
And so I note the comments by both the Prime Minister and Premier on that, and I'll reiterate that we will continue to be led by the health advice in relation to how that applies to schools across the state.
Okay, but they're pretty important statements from our New South Wales Premier and also the Prime Minister leading up the National Cabinet, of which we're a part. Is the Department of Education planning around that expectation from the Premier, the Prime Minister and the Doherty report that in a couple of months' time, we will, as a system of school education, be treating COVID as the equivalent of the flu?
I'm not sure it is helpful for me to deal in hypotheticals at this time. I think I've indicated, the Premier's indicated her intention to talk through plans about the return to school before the end of this week. And once she's done so, I'll be very happy to provide further information to the committee.
Ms. Harrison, you're saying it's not helpful for you, but the Premier of our state has outlined a clear expectation that every parent, student, citizen would be following and expecting to be implemented. Why aren't you, in your forward planning, implementing the Premier's statement backed by the Doherty report, adopted by the New South Wales government, that in a couple of months' time, COVID will be treated as the equivalent of the flu?
So we are, of course, involved in planning, and we are, of course, involved with New South Wales Health in following the health advice. And we are, of course, following the decisions made by Crisis Cabinet as they relate to education.
Okay, how many schools do we close because of the flu?
I am not aware that we have closed any schools because of the flu.
How many students do we ever keep at home because of the flu?
I will ask Mr. Disdale to provide some further guidance. We would, of course, ask families generally if children are unwell, especially at this time. We are very clear we would not want anyone with any symptoms coming to school, and generally would suggest that it is not in the best interest of a child suffering from flu to attend school, but Mr. Disdale will have some specific details on those requirements.
Chair, I can only add to what the Secretary said by way of we've always in public education encouraged the health and well-being of all our children and students. So anyone that's unwell, we would encourage them to seek medical attention and not be at school.
And to Mr. Martin, please, how many HSC subjects have ever been cancelled or exams delayed into November because of the flu?
To my knowledge, there have never been exams delayed or cancelled because of the flu, though individual schools, for other reasons, have had exams cancelled for a range of other reasons, bushfires, floods, various other issues. But to my knowledge, not because of the flu.
And Mr. Martin, finally, my last question, Mr. Martin, is NHSA and its work around the HSC also working on the forward planning statement of the Premier, supported by the Doherty report, that in a couple of months' time we should be treating COVID as the equivalent of the flu once we get to 70–80% vaccination rates.
NHSA is working on holding HSC written exams this year. We will follow the health advice of the time, just as the exams are about to begin. We'll follow any health advice that's required.
So you're following the health advice more than what the Premier has said for forward planning?
We note, of course, the Premier and the Prime Minister's statements, but in relation to conducting a safe high school certificate, it'll be the health advice that we follow on the days of the exam.
Thank you very much. Back to the opposition, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Look, I want to return to this question about the survey on the vaccination status. So, Ms. Kachia, you've indicated that the survey was voluntary and that there was obviously not a complete picture of the teaching workforce. What was the point of the survey if it's not going to be used for planning a return to school and looking after the health and safety of your workforce?
Thank you for the question, Mr. McAdam. It's Yvette Catchia for Hansard purposes. I'm not sure that I indicated that the survey wasn't being used for those purposes. Anytime we survey our workforce, we do it with a specific purpose in mind. And the survey, as I indicated, was voluntary and anonymous, but we did indicate its purpose clearly to participants when they received it so that they could make a choice about whether they wanted to participate or not. And in that survey preamble, we clearly indicated to potential participants that we would be using the information to give us guidance, to see what is happening in relation to vaccinations in our workforce. Information is always useful for those purposes. And yes, that includes, to answer your question more specifically, a safe return to schools, which we are all vested in.
But because you've chosen that the survey should be voluntary and anonymous, you don't have a very accurate picture, do you?
Mr. D'Adam, if I may comment, I think anyone would agree that over 50,000 responses is a statistically significant sample of our workforce in relation to vaccinations. It is a very significant proportion of our school workforce, and so those results do provide us with a reasonable basis on which to plan.
So I'll take you up on that point then, Ms. Harrison. Tell me then, how do you assess the risk given that the spread of the virus is very much concentrated in particular geographic areas? You haven't asked about geography. You don't actually know where any of the respondents are from. You don't know what schools they're from. You don't know what local government areas they're from. How can you possibly assess the risk properly without that information?
And so we did ask some information around broad locations, and so are able to give some breakdown of that, and by school type. So we were able to give some breakdown. We're also conscious of people's, what the time it takes for people to complete such surveys. We've kept it simple. It's given us good insight when added to the health information about overall community vaccination rates that allow us to make statistical assumptions and use that for planning moving forward.
I want to ask about the work health and safety dimension of this. Ms. Harrison, you've spoken about being guided by the health advice, but I've asked previously in this committee about the work health and safety obligations that the department has in terms of ensuring school safety. And it's been confirmed in evidence to this committee that the Work Health and Safety Act does apply in terms of assuring the safety of students and members of the school community. That obligation sits separate from the operation of the public health orders. So in the absence of there being a public health mandate around vaccination, there's still an obligation there under work health and safety law for you to take reasonable action to assure this health and safety of your workforce and those people who come into contact with the workplaces that are under your direction and control. Do you accept that that's correct?
I accept that we need to take appropriate and reasonable action. I would point the committee to the guidance we have for schools for safe operations at this time, a set of levels that we escalate through based on the health assessments in different regions. We have seen regional schools operating at level 2 for a period. When that situation changed in orange, we increased the level of operation of those schools to level 3 in our guidance to schools with tighter restrictions around their operations. When the whole state came under stay-at-home orders, all students are currently on level 4, which is the learning from home and the encouragement for parents to keep their students at home wherever possible, as outlined in the health orders. So we have taken many steps to ensure the safety, and I absolutely accept that, and as I've already given in my evidence today, that the best thing adults can do to protect children is to get vaccinated. That goes for parents, that goes for the whole community, and it certainly goes for our teachers, which is why we are encouraging our teachers to take up every opportunity to get vaccinated.
So on that, obviously you're indicating that vaccination is a reasonable measure that could be taken to provide a safe working environment.
I'm saying it's one of the measures, Mr. D'Adam. It's one of the many measures of a layered response to this.
It is a reasonable measure on your assessment?
It is one of many measures that we can take in order to limit the transmission of COVID in our school communities.
So if you don't take that measure of ensuring that your workforce is vaccinated, are you not exposing the department to potential action under the Work Health and Safety Act?
I think we are in very uncharted territory on these issues, Mr. D'Adam. I note the public debate and the advice from Safe Work Australia and other bodies in relation to the mandation of vaccinations. I note that for no other illness is vaccination mandatory for any of our workforce, but I also recognise the current challenges we are in at this time. At this time, we are strongly encouraging all of our staff to get vaccinated. We have, in those 12 LGAs, increased the opportunity for teachers to get vaccinated to make sure that they, for those that live in those communities, I think health have been very clear. That's been part of the approach to limiting transmission in those communities. And we will continue to be led by the health advice in relation to the role that vaccination will play in a safe return to school.
The Work Health and Safety Act also has obligations around consultation. What consultation are you undertaking in terms of the response, the health response, the work health and safety response in relation to the pandemic? How are you discharging your consultation obligations?
Certainly. So I will let Ms. Catcher provide some detailed advice on the formal consultation mechanisms we have in place. I would alert the committee to the fact I am in daily dialogue with representatives from all school sectors, with our own principals, with our own teachers, and with the New South Wales Teachers Federation. Virtually daily conversations across all, and Ms. Catcher can provide some further advice.
Thank you, Ms. Harrison. Thanks for the question, Mr. D'Adam. Yes, look, we have twice weekly meetings with Federation in addition to other communications that come in both writing but also telephone calls to numerous executive in the department. So there is an ongoing and very frequent dialogue and conversation happening about issues as they arise, including issues that have arisen in the recent public health order affecting those 12 affected LGAs. I think it's important to be really clear about what consultation means in the context of decisions that haven't been made, as the Secretary has indicated. A lot of these decisions are matters for the government. They take advice from New South Wales Health, as do we. And so consultation is discussing hypotheticals at times, but more to the point, the real consultation takes place when a firm decision has been made, and then we talk about the operationalisation of that decision. And I think our colleagues at New South Wales Teachers Federation understand that.
Okay, thank you. I might pass to my colleague now.
Ms. Houssos, for the purposes of Hansard. Ms. Harrison, I wanted to come back to you. At the moment, New South Wales Health does not put up on its website if schools are sites of transmission. How are the 88 school communities that have been sites of transmission, how are they told that there's been positive COVID cases on the school sites?
Yeah, thanks for the question. I think it's really important for the community to know that they will be notified if there is a community case of COVID that impacts on the school community. We have communication protocols in place where we alert the community anytime that we are made aware of a case, and health gives us advice on the level of impact on that community, the level of close contacts and the like. And Mr. Disdar can give you examples, the examples and specifics of how that plays out anytime that occurs.
Thanks, Secretary. For Hansard, Murat, Disdar, Ms. Houssos, in each of those cases, we receive telephone contact from New South Wales Health to indicate to us that there is a member of our school community, whether that be a staff member, a student, a cleaner, a contractor, a parent, who has tested COVID positive. We immediately go into a teleconference with New South Wales Health officials from the local health authority, with our school principal, with our Director Educational Leadership, with our Executive Director. New South Wales Health have interviewed the individual or individuals that are COVID positive as to their movements.
Mr. Disdar, we have limited time this morning. Can you tell me how school communities are notified if there is a positive COVID case? How are school communities notified?
Well, that's what I'd like to unpack, and was unpacking about how each of these cases unfold. If you're just after the contact point, Ms. Houssos, we are notified officially by New South Wales Health on each occasion there's a positive case of COVID-19 in our school communities.
And how do you communicate that with parents and students?
Well, that's what I was trying to unpack, Ms. Houssos. I was unpacking the process that takes place. What we do with New South Wales Health is then work on identifying any close contacts, because there may or may not be close contacts. The individual may or may not have been infectious whilst they were inside the school. If they are infectious and there are close contacts, New South Wales Health contact the close contacts and give them advice. So does the school. We send out a communication to the entire school community via the principal, provided by the department, approved by New South Wales Health, that indicates there's been a COVID positive case in our school community. The school will be non-operational. We say the length of time. The school will be cleaned. Contact tracing will occur. At-home learning will occur. We give advice from health about where testing in the area is available. and we provide that general health advice as well. On each occasion, we communicate to our school community by way of an entire communication, as well as the communication that's required for close contacts. It's quite a thorough process, Ms. Houssos.
So that communication goes out to the entire school community, to parents and to students, even if they weren't on site at the time?
Yes, it's incumbent on us to notify the school community of a positive COVID case, whether their children or young people were at school, whether the staff members were all at school or not. It's incumbent on us to notify the entire school community. There's another layer of contact, Ms. Houssos, for identified close contacts. They are given further individual contact by New South Wales Health and guidance as to what they need to do as well, by way of isolation, testing, etc.
Ms. Harrison, can you guarantee that this process will continue even when larger numbers of students return to school?
So, Ms. Houssos, I can certainly guarantee that any time we are notified by New South Wales Health of COVID cases in a school community, we will follow this protocol.
Okay, Mr. Martin, is not holding any HSC exams at all a live option being considered by the NHSA board at the moment?
The intention of the NHSA board, also of the government, the minister and the premier, is that HSC exams occur in 2021 to make as normal as possible the experience of those students having given the experience they've had more broadly this year. So at this stage, we are planning for and preparing for the HSC written exams to occur as usual.
Okay, but Mr. Martin, that might not be the case, isn't that correct? We've seen reports this week that some of the options that are being considered is just the English exam running. Is it true that the NHSA board is considering not running any exams at all at the moment?
I would say that it's unhelpful to speculate based on the media reports. There's been a media frenzy around the HSC this year, virtually daily newspaper articles. A proportion of them managed to get things correct or accidentally correct. We're going to follow the health advice at the time. We're planning to hold HSC examinations in 2021. We think it's the best interest of the students to keep engaged in school, to be focusing on their exams, to be preparing, using this time productively. So rather than speculate on the variety of potential issues that the papers may raise, we're concentrating on having the exams and making sure that we follow the health advice as we get as close to them as possible.
Mr. Martin.
Mr. Martin,
sorry.
Oh, sorry, go, Mr.
D'Adam. Mr. Martin, the question was very clear. It was about a question of fact. Has the NHSA board considered this option? It's a very straightforward question.
The NHSA board has considered all options that relate to the conduct of the HSC this year, focusing on the ways in which we can manage to deliver the written exams for those students, or as many students who can get there on the day. So that is the primary focus of the NHSA board. And in fact, it will be meeting again. It has consistently met, I think, 13 times over the last few months to work through all of the various options to make the experience as usual for students as possible. So I'm not going to speculate on whether this happens or that happens based on newspaper articles. I don't think it's helpful for the students. What we're doing is following the advice of health and making sure that we can conduct safe and secure HSC written exams.
Yes, but Mr. Martin, surely I understand that you say speculation is not helpful, but surely you understand that HSC students are extremely concerned about the way that exams are going to be conducted, about whether it's going to be safe, and they see rising cases and they want to know what is NHSA considering. And I ask you again, is holding no exams at all being considered by NHSA?
At this stage, holding no exams at all is not being considered by the NHSA board, because the health advice indicates that we can run exams based on a range of considerations and factors that we can deliver when the exams are due, and the health advice will follow, and we will make sure that we can run the exams at the time. I would say that the problem that is arising for students in uncertainty is driven partly by endless speculation about whether the exams will occur or not. The best thing that students can do, and what their schools and the systems both unions and everybody involved in education, including the universities and UAC, is saying concentrate, prepare, study, and expect your written exams to occur. So it is an unhelpful speculation, and I can't go any further than say we're preparing for the exams. All of those sorts of things are occurring as they would normally occur.
Thank you. Mr. Shoebridge.
Thanks, Chair. To you, Ms. Harrison, I think some numbers were given earlier today about the number of public schools that have been closed because of COVID. Can you provide the number of non-government schools that have been closed because of COVID?
I can provide that information to your notice. There have also been closures in both the independent and Catholic sectors. I'm seeing Mr. Disdar lean forward. That may well suggest he has the detail for us now, Mr. Shoebridge.
Yes, Secretary, I can help there. And Mr. Shoebridge, over the same time period, June to this morning, 27 August, 22 independent schools have been non-operational because of a COVID case, and 8 Catholic schools.
And that's since June of this year, Mr. Disdar?
That's since June 1 until this morning.
All right. And can you give details over the whole of this COVID crisis that we've had since 2020 on notice? Or unless you've got it there.
I don't have that with me. We can certainly see how we could assist the committee with that, Mr. Shoebridge.
Thanks, Mr. Disdar. Ms. Harrison, you heard Ms. Cutcher's response in relation to consultation with the union and here the Teachers Federation. Do you adopt that response, that the consultation occurs after the critical decisions are being made?
I will come off mute. Apologies, Georgina Harrison for Hansard. I would note both of our evidence that I am in regular contact with the President of the New South Wales Teachers Federation. Happy to provide my call records to the committee to indicate just how often we speak. We have a lot of conversations around the issues relating to schools all the time, but particularly at this time. And so we do seek advice and input in a range of formal and informal ways to scope and inform our plans. And of course, once government has made a decision and we need to work together to implement that decision in the best ways possible for our students and staff, we do so in partnership and through consultation with our stakeholders.
Harrison, Ms. Cutcher was quite specific and quite blunt. She said that the consultation occurs after the decision has been made by government. Do you accept Ms. Cutcher's position? Has that come from you as the head of the department, that style of, you call it consultation, with the union?
I would refer you to my previous answer to the same question, Mr. Shoebridge.
Ms. Harrison, do you accept, if you want to make a good decision in something as complicated as the New South Wales education system, that before you make a decision, you should consult with key players? And one of those key players has to be the Teachers Federation. Do you accept that's the best way of making decisions for something as complex as the New South Wales education system?
I absolutely accept that good decisions should be well informed by those across the system. That includes the Teachers Federation, the SPC, the Secondary Principals Council, the Primary Principals Association, our own principals, the independent sector, the Catholic sector, and we engage in conversations with all of those parties, and we do so regularly to inform our plans. And then once a decision is taken, we will work in partnership to develop the implementation proposals for those plans.
Ms. Harrison, your formal, you call it consultation process with the unions is 2 half-hour meetings a week where you tell them things. That's what happens, isn't it? It's 2 half-hour meetings a week where your executive team tells them things.
That is not my understanding of how a consultative forum works, Mr. Shoebridge. I haven't been in those consultative forums. I would note that members of the committee have also not been in those forums, so I would suggest it's not. We are not best placed to suggest what occurs in those, but Ms. Cutcher certainly is, and Ms. Owen, and can provide those details. They are a consultative forum to seek the views and share information. Ms. Cutcher, did you wish to provide some further details?
Are they twice a week? Are they twice a week? Are they twice a week for half an hour each?
Mr. Shoebridge, thank you, Secretary. I can answer the question, Mr. Shoebridge. As I indicated previously, we have two formalised meetings. They're twice a week, those meetings. In between those meetings, both the Federation and the department can raise questions for an agenda. And we also have and are in regular communication. So the Secretary has spoken to the communication she has with the Federation and indeed to all of our external stakeholders. But we also have regular email, telephone communication. Issues are raised in between those meetings. We prepare answers and they are covered at those meetings. And we're in, as I said, regular phone contact on specific issues.
Ms. Katya, my question was about those. Ms. Katya, my question was about those meetings. Are they half an hour long each?
Those meetings are, with the agreement of the Federation, twice a week for 30 minutes each, with matters to be actioned and carried over and dealt with in between those meetings.
And Mr. Shoebridge, if I could add, as I look here across my team,
Ms. Harrison,
I know that all of...
No, Ms. Harrison, I would really like to move on. We have limited time.
Mr. Shoebridge, next question.
Is it true that... Thanks, Chair. Is it true that teachers across New South Wales are going to find out about significant changes to their work over the next 3 months through that chaotic 11 a.m. press conference from the Premier today, that there hasn't been any communication with the teaching staff before what will be announced at 11 a.m. today, so that they know what's going to happen to their future? They have to rely upon that chaotic 11 a.m. press conference. Is that your plan?
Chair, I'll raise a point of order at that point. I think the opinion that it's a chaotic 11 a.m. press conference is somewhat confrontational and opinionated, and probably is not suitable for the questioning. And I think we could ask the questions without the additions.
I would have added
to the point of order.
Myself, but anyway, look, it doesn't really add to the nature of the press conference. If Ms. Katya could provide an answer, please.
So I'm happy to answer that question, Chair. It's Georgina Harrison.
Ms. Harrison.
I would just share with the committee that I have engaged with our school principals to inform our workforce of the changes that impact on them throughout this pandemic actively and in a timely fashion through direct emails to our staff, to our school leadership, through our internal communication channels, through weekly webinars with our principals. We will be holding one of those webinars later today. We have a number of forums in which we engage and inform our staff of the changes that impact on them. Obviously, when government decisions are made and they affect the whole community, the government takes decisions about the way it wishes to manage those announcements.
So, Ms. Harrison, it's true, isn't it, that tens of thousands of public school teachers are going to find out about the future of their health, safety, the future of their employment through this chaotic 11 a.m. press conference this morning, and you think that's fine?
So I note that it is your words, not mine, in relation to the press conference. And I note that the Premier has indicated all week of her intention to announce details of a plan for a return to school before the end of the week. There has been good forewarning of that throughout this week. I would note again that I am in regular contact with our principals.
Please, Ms. Harrison, there's not time. Ms. Harrison, there's not time for you to repeat things twice within the course of 3 minutes in this estimates hearing. Ms. Harrison, we wanted the Executive Director of Health and Safety from the department to come to this estimates hearing, but we've been told that that critical position, critical especially in a COVID crisis, has not been filled for months and months and months and months and months. Why? When was it last filled?
I must take they are not the facts, and I would ask that the committee gives us the opportunity to provide the facts before it provides assertions on those facts. We have a current acting director of work health and safety in position. The permanent holder of that role is on extended leave for personal reasons that are not of interest or relevance to this committee hearing. We have filled that role on an acting basis as is appropriate, and Ms. Katya is here as the Deputy Secretary who leads that area and can provide any details the committee needs.
And have you told that
Sorry, I'll have to interrupt
for their jobs? Have you told them in the last 24 hours they have to reapply for their jobs?
I'm sorry, time's expired. We'll have to come back to that after the morning tea break in the next session for Mr. Shoebridge. In the time remaining through to 11, could I bring you, Ms. Harrison, to a matter that's come up out of online learning. Earlier this year in mandatory teacher training for child protection purposes in primary schools, a scenario was issued to teachers, scenario 5 from the Department of Education Child Protection Update 2021 for hypothetical, a year 5 boy called Ben. And it reads as follows. You have a remote learning session with your year 5 class today. During the interactions with the students, you notice that in the background of Ben's session, there is a crack pipe on the kitchen bench. You also noticed yesterday Ben's mother briefly appeared in the background and was slurring her words and appeared intoxicated. And it goes on to say, because Ben is quiet and perhaps anxious during online learning, this is a matter where Ben may be at risk of harm and there needs to be a child protection report. Can I ask please to the department, is this a realistic scenario? And is this really something that teachers are expected to do during the online learning period we've had for every school in the state?
Chair, so firstly, could I just flag, it's Georgina Harrison for Hansard. Could I just flag, it was quite difficult to hear you through that question. So if I could just confirm that I think you have asked whether a particular part of our child protection training was appropriate and reflected real life situations our teachers might need to interact with. Is that correct?
Yeah, regarding the citing what's supposed to be a crack pipe in this hypothetical scenario, it's on the kitchen bench. The teacher also noticed that Ben's mother briefly appeared in the background the day before and was slurring her words and appeared intoxicated. And this is a matter for a child protection report.
Mr. Disdar can provide details on that training and the responsibilities of teachers in relation to mandatory reporting of child protection issues. Mr. Disdar.
Thanks, Secretary. For Hansard Murat Disdar. Chair, it's a good question. I've been on the Child Protection Committee of the department for a number of years. What we try and do with our annual update training, it's a mandatory training for all our teachers across our system, is to look at real scenarios that have been lived and de-identify them and provide scenario learning for the workforce of what they may come across and encounter. Our workforce has asked us, Chair, for stronger guidance with last year's experience of COVID and learning and teaching from home around their obligations when conducting Zoom or Teams or Google Classroom lessons synchronously, where they may encounter well-being or welfare concerns for the young person while they're undertaking a lesson. So I can confirm that the scenarios are generally drawn from real examples our teachers, our workforce has lived and can live. And it's been a new world for our workforce since last year, teaching and learning from home. And that guidance has been well received in the training.
Can I just ask, with this online learning mechanism, has there been an increase in the number of child protection reports overall by teachers and the department?
Chair,
Yeah, I was going to say, if I could just confirm, what I think I heard was if we could provide advice on the rate of child protection or number of child protection reports the department has made during online learning. Is that correct?
That's right.
We can certainly provide those details on notice.
And can I come to another part of this teacher training module for child protection? In scenario number 1, a boy called Alex in year 3 specifically identified that his father is a miner and a farmer. And because of a weekend where Alex spends time with his father, Alex has come to school and has hit another child. And for that reason, there needs to be a child protection report. Why are farmers and miners being singled out here, apropos nothing, as a scenario that's put to teachers that seems to indicate there's a heightened risk of family violence?
And so, Chair, I'm sorry, I think you broke up a bit there for us again. We're having a little bit of trouble with the sound, but I think if I can just confirm the question is that you're referring to another part of the child protection training in which someone has been identified as a farmer and a minor, and it is your assertion that there are parallels being drawn in relation to the person's employment status and the content of that guidance. Mr. Disdar can provide, if that's the right question, Mr. Disdar can provide some further information.
Chair, I don't have the scenario in front of me, but the purpose of these scenarios is to elicit staff discussion around what would be reportable and what would not be reportable. So I'll just take the scenario as you read it. Don't have it in front of me. The primacy of that scenario would be, why did the child hit the other child? You look at the welfare and well-being around that, the possible discipline around that. It would be irrelevant, the occupational status, etc., that you referred to. And that may well be a scenario, again, I don't have it in front of me, where the upshot is that that's not a mandatory reporting requirement. It's simply handled at the school level as a welfare and discipline matter. The purpose of these scenarios, let me repeat, is to elicit discussion in the workforce to know clearly when they should report and when they should not report. The first case you referred to sounded to me like one where the reporting would occur, and the second one sounded to me like where the reporting would not occur.
Thank you. It's now 1 minute to 11. Given that my audio sounds a bit suspect from what I'm hearing in feedback, we might adjourn at that point until 11:15 to resume questioning, and of course in the interim listen to what sounds like an announcement about the future of the schools and the HSC. Thanks everyone for your participation, and meeting adjourned until 11:15.
sector have been consulted.
Hi everyone, we've got some people back. Georgina, Murat.
Chair, if I could request, I think Mr. Disdar has some of the information that was asked for earlier about the number of COVID cases in schools since the start of the pandemic. If we were able to provide those to the committee at the start of this next session, we'd be very happy to do so.
Yeah, but at the moment, we've only got, we've got more MPs coming back here now because the Minister is still speaking at the press conference, but I assume we've got the gist of what's been announced today.
And Chair, if it would be helpful, I'm able to provide a statement of clarification and detail on those plans that have been announced.
Okay. Well, I'll declare the meeting recommenced after our brief adjournment and go to the Secretary, Ms. Harrison, to go through the plans announced and also the extra clarifying information about the COVID numbers. Thank you.
And Mr. Chair, before we proceed on that, I'm just happy to indicate that we will not be asking any government questions so that Ms. Harrison's time can be taken as effectively the government's question time at the end.
Thank you. That'll take us to 12:45 then. Thank you, Ms. Harrison.
Thank you. Mr. Disdar, would you like to start by confirming those COVID case numbers that were requested earlier?
Thank you, Secretary. Thank you, Chair. I think Mr. Shoebridge asked us the number of schools that have been non-operational from 2020 onwards with COVID. What I can tell the committee is since 1 March 2020 until this morning, there have been 154 schools across all 3 sectors in total that have been non-operational for face-to-face teaching and learning because of a COVID case. The breakdown is 107 government schools, 30 independent schools, and 17 Catholic schools. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Disdar, and thank you for the opportunity to provide a statement on our return to school plan following the Premier's announcement just a few minutes ago. Can I say at the outset that this plan has been developed in close partnership with New South Wales Health and led by our expert education staff within the department. This plan seeks to ensure the safest return to face-to-face learning for our staff and students. We know our students learn best in the classroom, and we know parents and schools are anxious for clarity about the weeks ahead. We have put students and staff safety at the centre of our decision-making in developing this plan, which enables a staggered return of students to school sites under COVID-safe conditions. In Greater Sydney and other areas currently operating under level 4 restrictions, the New South Wales Health advice is that it is safest for students to return in stages. Students in kindergarten and year 1 will return first, given the importance of developing their foundational learning in the early years and their disrupted experience to date. Year 12 and HSC students will also be prioritised as they prepare to complete their final year of schooling and transition to further education, training and work. Schools will restrict activities in relation to other established student cohorts. This may be in class, grade or stage groupings, depending on the size and organisation of the school. Schools will consider, where practical, physical distancing and limiting interactions between groups at entry and exit points, transitioning between classes and during recess and lunch breaks to reduce contact between student cohorts and staff. In line with broader community milestones and settings, student cohorts starting with kindergarten and year 1 will begin face-to-face learning from Monday the 25th of October under what we are terming level 3+ operations, as long as the appropriate community transmission and vaccination requirements are achieved. Other cohorts will then return to school sites under the same COVID-safe conditions in the following order. Years 2, 6 and 11 from the 1st of November. Years 3, 4, 5, 7, 8, 9 and 10 from the 8th of November. Year 12 students and those completing their HSC are already able to return in a very limited way, and this will continue for the remainder of term 3. From the 25th of October, these students will have full-time access to school campuses and their teachers. Importantly, if stay-at-home rules are lifted in a local government area or region before the 25th of October, all students living or learning in that area will return to face-to-face learning under the department's existing COVID-safe level 3 settings as previously established. For instance, if stay-at-home orders are lifted in parts of regional New South Wales from 11th of September, we would expect schools in those areas to return to face-to-face teaching and learning for all cohorts at level 3 settings from Monday the 13th of September. In relation to the HSC exams, these will be delayed until the 9th of November, with a revised timetable and guidelines for COVID-safe HSC to be released by NHSA in early September. All students sitting their HSC will receive priority vaccination if they are eligible, and we will be encouraging all Year 12 students from today to be booking in through the new availability with GPs from the Commonwealth part of the vaccination programme. We know that it is a particularly challenging time for our Year 12 students who are operating under a variety of circumstances across the state. Can I reiterate that NHSA has arrangements in place to ensure no student is disadvantaged due to the impact of stay-at-home orders. A special illness and misadventure process will ensure equity and fairness for all students. We have confidence in the remarkable resilience being shown by our Year 12 students and teachers, and we take confidence in what we saw last year, that despite disruption, HSC students still achieved results consistent with previous year groups. In relation to vaccinations, they are a critical element of our plan, alongside mask wearing, reduced mingling between cohorts, and staggered start and finish times. We have heard loud and clear from principals, stakeholder groups, and school communities that this is fundamental to ensuring confidence in any return to school. For this reason, the Premier announced that, as with the aged care and health sectors, mandatory double doses of vaccination will be required for all public school and preschool staff from the 8th of November, and from the 25th of November for those supporting the staged return of student cohorts on site. From surveying our schools, we believe around 2/3 of our school-based staff have had at least one dose of a vaccine, and more want to be vaccinated as soon as possible. This is ahead of the general community vaccination rates, and we applaud and support our staff in this regard. We are working hard with New South Wales Health to make sure staff can access an appropriate vaccine, regardless of where they live or work across the state. New South Wales Health will provide priority vaccinations at the Kudos Bank Arena for Greater Sydney school-based school and preschool staff in the week beginning 6th of September. School-based staff are also encouraged to make use of the GP network, pharmacist network, and other avenues to be vaccinated with whatever vaccine is available to them and is appropriate for them as soon as possible. Eligible students aged 16 and over are also strongly encouraged to get vaccinated and will be enabled to do so before their return to school. We are also monitoring Commonwealth and state discussions on how the vaccine rollout following the Prime Minister's announcement just before the break in relation to 12 to 15-year-olds will commence and be supported for our students. Can I be clear that strict conditions of COVID-safe operations will be required to enable face-to-face learning? The New South Wales return to face-to-face learning for schools under stay-at-home restrictions has been informed by the Doherty Institute Modelling Report for National Cabinet and ongoing advice from New South Wales Health. For a return to face-to-face learning at level 3+, the following health conditions will need to have been met. Where a local government area has reached required levels of adult double vaccination rate and required levels of community transmission, students return to school in cohort groups, with students in kindergarten, Year 1 and Year 12, as well as those completing their HSC prioritised and other cohorts to follow. Start and finish times will be staggered with no mixing between cohorts. Any staff member returning to school sites will be required to present evidence of 2 doses of vaccine from the 25th of October, and vaccination will be mandatory for all school staff, and priority will be provided to them at Kudos Bank Arena and in other opportunities across the state to support their access to vaccinations. Eligible high school students will be strongly encouraged to have received 2 doses of vaccine before they return to face-to-face learning. Areas across New South Wales that are removed from stay-at-home orders will return to school to level 3 settings. Local government areas and suburbs of concern, currently in the southwest and western Sydney, will continue to learn from home until they are removed from being areas of concern. The COVID-19 pandemic has had a significant impact on the delivery of education in New South Wales and around the world. Our students, educational leaders, teachers, staff and families have shown remarkable resilience, capability and flexibility through this time. While the pandemic has affected everybody differently, there are some clear learnings and common themes emerging from New South Wales and around the world, including the needs for students to return to school as soon as it is safe for them to do so, because nothing can replace face-to-face teaching in a classroom. Being at school with their teachers and peers is vital for our student well-being, social and emotional development, as well as their academic achievement. I'm sure the committee will join me in thanking our hardworking teachers and school leadership teams for their ongoing support of students learning from home. And in these unnerving times, teachers and principals have provided our students and one another with remarkable support. Their efforts have taken place in the face of great uncertainty and anxiety and are sincerely appreciated. I want to also thank our staff in the department for their support to our teachers to enable them to provide the best possible learning from home experience for students. Teachers have told us that the support provided through professional development resources, webinars and guided learning packages has been critical to support them in serving their communities. I thank the committee for the opportunity to outline the details of our return to school plan, which has been created to provide for a staggered return of face-to-face learning under COVID-safe conditions. I know that we'll be working through the public health orders over coming days in relation to some of these issues, but we'll seek to answer the committee's questions as thoroughly as possible.
Thank you, Ms Harrison. We'll now go to the Labor opposition, please.
Thanks very much, Mr Chair, and thanks for the opportunity to ask these questions. Ms Harrison, I wanted to ask you about two terms that you used in your statement then, appropriate community transmission and vaccination targets. Can you just outline what that will mean for schools?
Yes, so firstly, we're working with health in relation to the appropriate definition of low community transmission. We are looking at evidence across the world for definitions that have been applied. I note the CDC in the United States has provided some definitions, and we're also working with them around the vaccination targets. I think if you look at the current rates of uptake of vaccinations in New South Wales, if we continue on this trajectory, we will exceed 70% double dose vaccination by the time we are looking at this return to school plan.
So the 70% double dose vaccination is the prerequisite for schools to return. Is that correct?
It is expected that we will be at least that by the time schools return.
But if we don't?
So the individual circumstances by LGA will will be the decision-making basis for that return to school. Our strong message to communities is for parents to get vaccinated, clearly for teachers to get vaccinated, and to ensure that we can have students return to school safely.
So just to be clear, if irrespective of whether the 70% vaccination rate is within the LGA, that won't be the applicable thing that will cause students not to return. It will be the community transmissions.
So as I indicated, we're continuing to work with health on the specific definitions. We would expect a number of communities to be way above 70% by the time we get to the 25th of October, and I'm happy to provide further detail of that on notice.
Okay, but this is a very significant announcement today that you have just made, that you have said students will be back in the classroom from the 25th of October. But what you're saying, it seems to be that you've said that students in the local government areas of concern will not be returning on the 25th of October. Is that correct?
Any LGA that is identified in the public health orders as an LGA of concern will not be returning under this plan until they are removed from being LGAs of concern.
So as it stands at the moment, if the current 12.5 local government areas of concern remain areas of concern, then those students will not return on the 25th of October.
That's correct.
And what is the criteria for those students to return back to school?
So the first threshold will be that they are no longer classified as an LGA of concern.
Okay, so that will be New South Wales Health Advice?
It's New South Wales Health Advice in relation to the public health orders and how LGAs are categorised, yes.
So, Ms Harrison, you would accept that these are some of the most disadvantaged areas in New South Wales that are going to remain learning at home. What additional efforts are you putting in place now to support those students?
Thank you for the question, because I really do want to pay tribute to our teachers across those LGAs who have done absolutely exceptional work in supporting their students and families. They know their students and communities exceptionally well, and they are providing broad support for all of their needs. And Mr. Disdar can give you some specific examples of the way those communities are being supported in their learning.
Thank you, Secretary.
Sorry, Mr. D'Adam, before you answer, Ms. Harrison, I'm not asking about the incredible efforts of teachers. I'm not asking about the teachers who are going above and beyond. I'm asking what additional resources will the Department of Education commit to today, given that today's announcement, as it stands, won't apply to some of the most disadvantaged areas in Sydney?
Certainly, and as I said, Mr. Disdar, we are providing that support now and will continue to provide that support. And Mr. Disdar can provide examples if the committee is interested in what is happening in those communities. We are also providing via our department teams guided learning packages for all students from kindergarten through to year 6. We've recently, I think as recently as yesterday, added to those resources with support for preschool learners and are seeking to build up further resources for those in high school. They provide both online and work packages that can be printed by schools to support that additional learning. And Mr. Disdar, as I said, can provide examples of the learning being offered in those communities.
Well, Ms. Harrison, we have very limited time. I'd like to just ask you another question. So does that mean that HSC students in the local government areas of concern will not be able to return to school at all if the rates of community transmission, if they remain a local government area of concern?
So yes, their access to school will be limited if they remain LGAs of concern.
Sorry, HSC students will not be able to return to school if they are in a local government area of concern.
I'm sure the committee will appreciate, and I note from our earlier questions, just how fundamental and central the health advice is to our plans in terms of safely returning students to school. The current advice from health is for us not to allow HSC students in those 12 and a half LGAs back onto school sites, so we are not doing so. That position is unlikely to change unless the overall community health position in those communities also improves.
Well, how will they sit the exams?
Well, I'd just add, Secretary, this might be a benefit to the committee, Ms. Houssos. The identified LGAs, our schools are providing HSC continuity of teaching and learning. It would be remiss to think that the HSC course for those students are not continuing. It's the face-to-face component on site that's not the case. Many schools are running synchronous lessons at a timetable. Many schools that I have come across in those identified LGAs have safety net, welfare, well-being structures that are being provided for those Year 12 students. Many have pivoted around the trial examinations and either run them online or run alternative tasks. I'd also just remind the committee that it's week 7 of term 3, and many of the HSC courses in many of our contexts have actually been completed by way of teaching and learning to meet the syllabus outcomes, and our students and teachers are in the throes of revision, refinement, practicing for the actual HSC exams. I just want to call out the remarkable work of the profession on the ground in those identified LGAs, because every secondary teacher in this state puts the primacy of HSC students first, and it's remiss of the committee, remiss of society to think those children are not having continuity of teaching and learning. We as a department recognise that it's not quite the same. Every educator recognises it's not quite the same as being on-site face-to-face, but we have connected with these Year 12 students through the schools. We've connected with teachers and leaders.
Mr. Disdar, I'm going to stop you there. I understand about learning at home. I too, as a parent.
Mr. Disdar, because of the time constraint, we need shorter answers. You're now covering old terrain. So Ms. Houssos plus Mr. D'Adam had an important question as to how will those students sit the HSC.
That's exactly what I was about to say. Ms. Harrison, how will students in local government areas of concern sit their HSC exams if they're not allowed to attend school?
So firstly, we have been working hard to give access to vaccination for those Year 12 students to give them the best chance of sitting their HSC safely at that time. Mr. Martin can provide some further advice in relation to the ongoing work with New South Wales Health to ensure that we have COVID safe plans in place for examinations.
Mr. Martin.
Thank you. The date of the 9th of November is predicated on students having access to vaccinations and teachers being fully vaccinated. It's the timing of the 9th is related around the vaccination program. So the first HSC exam, which is generally the English exam on the 9th, some 70,000 students will be able to go for their English exam because we will anticipate the vaccination rates to have reached what the targets are. We will have really strict protocols in place for those students at the exam rooms, numbers of students in rooms, the invigilation, mingling before and after, mask wearing, whatever the health requirements are of that day and of that time, we will follow. So the students in the lockdown LGAs vaccinated by and on with the capacity to be vaccinated by that time will be able to sit those HSC exams. That's the plan we're working to.
Ms Houssos, if I may clarify those targets, it is our expectation that communities where schools open will have a minimum double dose vaccination rate of 70%. The information we have from health based on current trajectories is that by the 25th of October, we will have exceeded that 70% double dose rate in the community. And I think the government has been clear throughout that its plans for reopening are contingent on vaccination rates. And so we urge everyone to therefore go out and get vaccinated.
On that point, Ms Harrison, can I just clarify, that's 70% of the adult population. Is that the metric that
That's
you're...
correct.
So it doesn't necessarily cover the student population being vaccinated at anything like those numbers?
Yes, so I would appreciate, you would appreciate that it is only as of today that ATAGI have approved the vaccination for 12 to 15-year-olds. So at this point, that is not factored into the modelling around the 70% vaccination rates.
Can I ask about the accommodation requirements in terms of social distancing for particularly the K-1 cohort? How is that going to be facilitated? How are you going to maintain social distancing? We know that younger kids are susceptible to contracting the virus. They won't be vaccinated. We know that even vaccinated adults can still contract the virus. So there are clearly health and safety risks associated with that proposal. How do you mitigate that?
Thank you for the question. I think some of our younger learners pose these risks for a range of issues, and this is no different to that. I would add that we are staggering start times and finish times to reduce mingling between cohorts and groups. We will be encouraging primary school students to wear masks as part of this return. We think that's an important part of what we can do. It's going to be encouraged because we recognise the challenges of securing a mask onto a kindergartner throughout a day, but our intention is to provide for that wherever possible. I would also just say that these risks must be balanced. They must be balanced against the other risks posed to this cohort of students. I have a kindergarten child at home myself. The lack of social interaction, engagement with a teacher, however strong, and I'm fortunate that she is receiving exceptional learning from home support from her school, however strong, poses our kids a different set of risks. And so certainly with the health advice, we are seeking to balance all of those risks and apply an appropriate and safe way back to the classroom. And Mr. Disdar can give some more information on the social distancing.
Thanks, Secretary Murat Disdar for hands up. Mr. D'Adam, as you would know, the staggered return is a great advantage here for our primary context in being able to space our kindergarten classes across the school and then year one across the school. You would also know, Mr. D'Adam, as would the committee, that the class size policy, which is an agreement with the New South Wales Teachers Federation, has class sizes of no more than 20 and 21, 20 in kindergarten, 21 in year one. So it's not like a classroom of 30 year 6 students. That enables, with the younger learners, solidifying the concept of distancing. It also gives us the staggered return the opportunity to distance the adults in their staff room, in their stage spaces, alongside the other health settings and health requirements that the Secretary outlined. When we're full school population, hopefully with the right health settings in place, and we're on top of COVID, hopefully. That allows us to utilise our experiences last year, where we stagger pick-up and drop-off times, we stagger recess and lunch times. And we've got good history of being able to do this, particularly in large contexts, Mr. D'Adam, where you've got large year groups, being able to do that in a practical way and in a contextual way in the school context. Where my child attends kindergarten, for example, there are 4 entry points to that school, and that school used last year all 4 of those entry points during COVID to stagger the year group's entry, for example.
Mr. Disdale, surely you'd appreciate.
Schools have good identified ways.
Surely you'd appreciate that the parameters that applied last year and the kind of measures that were effective last year clearly don't cut it with the Delta variant. How have you actually changed up to take account of the enhanced risk? The risk is much, much greater now in terms of the transmissibility of this variant. And it seems that the department is intent on relying on the same approaches that were applied in a completely different context.
Mr. I don't accept the premise of
point, but I don't accept that I'm saying the same premise. I'm saying schools can rely on some of those learnings from last year to put them into action this year. The Secretary's made it quite clear what will be ramped up health requirements for that return to school. So I'm not proclaiming it's the same. I'm saying some of those learnings are fruitful when we work on a staggered return in a school context.
And so, Mr. D'Adam, if I may, the differences from last year are that we have a vaccination for the adult population. The differences from last year are that we were requiring masks to be worn in all high school settings, indoor and out, in primary schools by staff, and for primary school students to be encouraged to wear masks. These are different settings that we are dealing with. I would also note that it's really important that people refer I guess to the experts in relation to the transmissibility and seriousness of the illness for children. That's certainly what we will be doing and have been doing and will continue to do.
Ms. Harrison, can I ask you, what happens to those teachers who are unable to be vaccinated? What's your plan for them?
So obviously, we are aware that for some individuals who may have reactions to vaccines or medical reasons why they cannot be vaccinated, we will need to put measures in place to support them. The best support for them in a school environment is for all of their colleagues to be vaccinated if they are unable themselves to be vaccinated. So it's for their protection also that we'll be requiring the rest of staff to be vaccinated. For those who refuse to be vaccinated, it will not be possible for us to maintain their employment in a school setting under this public health order.
And for those who don't refuse, for those who are unable to be vaccinated, can you give them an assurance that they won't be medically retired, that they'll be accommodated within the system?
So certainly if someone is unable to, for medical reasons, to be vaccinated, they will be supported in their school environment by their colleagues being vaccinated in the same way they are currently for other illnesses, and they will be supported by the system with non-classroom based duties as and when and if that is appropriate for them.
Ms. Harrison, can I just press you on the local government areas of concern? So you said in your statement that you are looking across the world for definitions, and then you said it was if local government areas were removed from the areas of concern. So what is the criteria as it stands at the moment, and will that change?
So firstly, it is New South Wales Health under public health orders who determine whether or not an LGA is of concern in relation to the spread of COVID or not. That is not my area of expertise and nor my area of decision making. In relation to the return to school plan, we will be looking at for all those other LGAs under existing stay-at-home orders outside those areas of concern, for high vaccination rates and for low community transmission. Initially looking and we are confirming with health at the CDC definition of community transmission of 50 cases per 100,000 head of population.
50 cases per 100,000 of population.
Yes.
And what happens if those local government areas of concern don't ever reduce to lower than 50 cases of 100,000 per population?
So that will depend on a number of factors. Firstly, the health advice and whether or not health determine that those areas no longer need to be considered LGAs of concern. I would note this is an evolving situation and it will continue to evolve, and I'm sure the health advice and understanding will continue to evolve. And that will be the advice that we will be led by for those communities.
Can I just, is Mr. Martin online?
He is, yes.
Okay, I think I'm just seeing that he's having some difficulties connecting, so I might come back to him. Ms. Harrison, this CDC definition of 50 cases per 100,000, how often is that? Over what period of time?
I'll need to confirm that with New South Wales Health, as it will be their measure of community transmission that we rely upon.
Okay. Sorry, I just wanted to be clear. Well, perhaps Ms. Harrison, you can answer this. Are HSC students in lockdown LGAs only allowed to attend the English exam if they're vaccinated?
We have not mandated any vaccination requirements for our students. We have simply tried to ensure that every student in those LGAs who is sitting their HSC examinations this year has had an opportunity to get vaccinated as part of the broad community health response, but also to ensure that they are best placed to be able to sit their exams safely come November.
Is it the expectation that the full HSC will occur in November?
I should answer that, Secretary. As indicated by the Premier today, the new exam timetable will be produced by NHSA by mid-September again, and I know that it will be not necessarily welcomed, but I'm not going to speculate at all in relation to that exam timetable. The students need a level of certainty. We've given them 9th of November. We'll give them an exam timetable after the committee has met. We have a look at the logistics of the 70,000 students who have to sit the exams, and we'll produce something that gives them certainty as soon as possible. But rather than speculate on the media reports, etc., I prefer to say that as the Minister and the Premier did, mid-September, new exam timetable.
Can I just ask about
it's the chair here. The opposition time has expired. Could I just say, because of the Wi-Fi problems here in Parliament House, I've stopped my video, but hopefully my audio is still okay. And now we go to Mr. Shoebridge, please, for 10 minutes.
Oh, thanks, Chair. To either Mr. Disdar or Ms. Harrison, Mr. D'Adam was asking about the health advice and the safety of having kindergarten and year one students back on the 25th of October, and asking about concerns about how you could ensure social distancing and the like. The answers came back that there was expected to be higher vaccination rates amongst students, and there would be mask wearing for primary school and above. Neither of those actually respond to the concerns Mr. D'Adam had about kindy and year one students. What does the health advice say about the risk of transmission amongst that cohort on and from the 25th of October?
I think that would have to be a question for New South Wales Health, Mr. Shoebridge. What I can say to the committee today is that our advice remains the same, that the best thing anyone can do to protect our youngest population at this time is for the adults to be vaccinated, which is, I think, what I referred to in my answer to Mr. D'Adam. That is critical. The social distancing of kindy and year one students is of course difficult, but we are looking at layers of measures of protection in our schools to provide the safest environment possible. And the safest environment possible is one where all those adults are vaccinated in order to help stem any transmission of COVID. And I would indicate that, of course, that will be as safe, if not safer, than some of the other community settings that those young people might be in. So I think it's really important that we put this in the context of the broad community and the risks overall to our young people. And of course, if you wish to follow that question up with health, I'm sure they'll be able to provide you with some information.
Ms. Harrison, I want to be clear. My question is to the Education Department. You'll be asking parents to send their kindy and year one students back to school. I think all of us are desperately keen to see the earliest possible safe return to school. But those parents deserve to know what the risk of transmission is of COVID amongst their kindy and first class kids. So I'm asking you now, what does the health advice say is the risk of transmission when those kids return on the 25th of October?
So, Mr. Shoebridge, I appreciate and understand your question. I'm sure you will also appreciate how challenging a question that is to answer, because in different communities, the rates of transmission will be different, which is why we have put in a threshold of low transmission of cases in a community in order to support this return. The transmission rates in any given school community will be correlated and related to the levels of transmission within the broader community. And so I cannot provide you today a breakdown by LGA and of those transmission rates and what the prediction will be as far out as 25th of October, or even what that prediction might be today.
Well, if you can't predict what the transmission rates will be at the 25th of October, can you predict, why is it that you keep saying that there will be this return on the 25th of October? Are you saying there will be a return on the 25th of October, but only if the transmission rates are lower than that CDC figure that you gave? Is that your position?
So I'm not sure if you heard my previous answer, but yes, it is our intention that schools will only return in communities where vaccination rates are high and community transmission is low.
All right. And you've been given advice from health about what the risk of transmission is of COVID-19 for kindies and first class kids, I assume? You've been given that advice by health?
We've been given advice by health on the best ways to mitigate those risks that are present across the community for our young people. We have taken that advice. We have taken that advice to the extreme of mandating vaccinations for our staff, because we think it is so important for the adults around those students to ensure their safety. And the best way we can do that is to ensure the adults around them are vaccinated.
You won't tell us what the health advice is about the risk of transmission, though, of unvaccinated infants, kids in kindy, first and second class. You won't tell us what the New South Wales health advice is about the risk of transmission. Can you understand how utterly frustrating that is?
I can certainly sense your frustration.
No, let me finish, Ms. Harrison. Let me finish. For parents who will be sending their kids to school, they want to know what the risks are. They want to take those responsible decisions as parents, and you're not giving them the information. Can you understand how frustrating that is?
And so, Mr. Shoebridge, I understand the frustration you are voicing. What I also understand is that parents want to see their students back at school in a manner which is safe and as safe as the rest of the community. We are putting measures in place to ensure that safety. We are putting measures in place to ensure that the adults around them when they're at school will be vaccinated. We are putting measures in place to ensure that cohorts don't mix. We are putting measures in place that require mask wearing by our students. We are putting measures in place across the board to minimise those risks in our school settings and maximise the educational opportunities for our students. If you wish to get further advice on the nature of community transmission, I am not the expert in that, and it would be inappropriate for me to try and provide.
Ms. Harrison, I'm not asking about community transmission. I'm asking about transmission in the workplaces and the spaces that you control, which is the classrooms of New South Wales schools. And you're not giving me the answers because you say it's cabinet in confidence. Is that right?
So I've already indicated that the community transmission and any potential risk of transmission in schools are inextricably linked, Mr. Shoebridge. It is not possible for me to comment on what may be a risk in a school unrelated to the risk in the broader community. And so what I can assure parents of New South Wales is that we have a layered response in place to protect the well-being of our students and to ensure that our school systems has the most appropriate settings in place. I would say to the committee that there is no jurisdiction in the world who will have achieved the vaccination rates that our community will have achieved before our students go back. We are in an incredibly positive position. We are looking at very low community transmission rates in order for those school communities to return, again, to ensure that the environment in which students are going to school is absolutely as safe as we can make it.
Ms. Harrison, have the Health and Safety Directorate, the team in the Health and Safety Directorate, who have been working 18 hours a day trying to come up with health and safety solutions for schools, have they been told that they have to reapply for their jobs?
So firstly, I would reiterate that department staff across the organisation are working exceptionally long hours in support of our school communities, and that's exactly what we think the Department of Education is here to do. And yes, we are looking at some changes in relation to our corporate services structure that Mr. Withy can provide you some further details on.
No, Ms. Harrison, it's a very simple question. Have the Health and Safety Directorate, the people who have been working 18 hours a day to try and deal with this health and safety crisis, in the middle of this, have you told them they all have to reapply for their jobs? Have you done that?
I just indicated Mr. Withy could provide you with some further information. Mr. Shoebridge, if you would allow him to answer.
So the answer to that, Mr. Shoebridge, is no, they have not.
So have they been told that their department is being restructured and that they will have to reapply for their jobs? They haven't been told that. Is that right, Mr. Whitaker?
So at the moment, there are a number of things happening across the corporate services parts of the department. As we discussed at the last estimates hearing in March, the rest of the department undertook a realignment process in September 2020.
I'm sorry, Mr. Withy, our time is limited here. I've asked you about the Health and Safety Directorate. So if you limit your answer to that, I'll then ask you about the IT Directorate.
As my previous answer pointed to, Mr. Shoebridge, nobody in the Health and Safety Directorate has been asked to reapply for their jobs.
Have they been told that it'll be restructured and they will have to reapply for their jobs? And has the same happened in relation to IT? And if not, what's happening in that space?
So as my previous answer started to unpack, we are undertaking a raft of work at the moment across the corporate services of the department to look at ensuring we are well set up to deliver good and effective support to our schools, our principals, our teachers. As part of that, we continue to look at the structural aspects of corporate services and within operations group, which, to be very clear, does not include the Health and Safety Directorate. The Health and Safety Directorate sit in the people group under Ms. Katchia. Within operations group, we are undertaking a process at the moment where we are looking at a placement process for public service senior executive roles. That does not include the Health and Safety Directorate. There will be some changes to reporting lines that result from those changes, which will see some changes to the reporting responsibilities in relation to how we build resilience across the department and across our workforce. That will mean the creation of a new resilience team within the operations group. But again, to repeat, it will not require any changes to jobs within the Health and Safety Directorate.
Can you provide the written advice that was given to?
Mr. Shoebridge, I was just going to advise that Mr. Latham has had connection issues again. So as Deputy Chair, I'll be taking over chairing the meeting at this time. You've got about a minute left, Mr. Shoebridge, for one more question, then I'll go to the opposition.
Well, Mr. Fang, my assumption is that I'll continue the crossbench time and then I'll give Mr. Latham my time when he returns. So as crossbench time is preserved, that would be the fairest way forward.
Okay, if we're happy to do that. I'm just not sure that we'll actually have a full 10 minutes at the next time, but I'll discuss with the Secretariat and you can continue your question.
Thanks, Mr. Fang. Will you provide on notice the advice given to staff this week about those restructures and changes?
So we are currently engaged in a consultation process about some of those changes. That process will kick off on Monday. The conversations this week have taken place with the public service senior executive cohort within the operations group and people group, and I'm very happy to provide some of those details on notice.
I'm not sure who's the best to answer about what the number of COVID outbreaks have been in early childhood centres in New South Wales since the outbreak of this COVID crisis. Ms. Harrison, I'll put it first to you and you may direct it when appropriate.
Yeah, thanks for the question. I would note, firstly, that our early childhood services have continued throughout this pandemic to serve their communities and families, and they have kept open their doors. And we thank them for that, for the support that they have provided to communities across the state. And Ms. Owen can give you those details.
Thanks, Secretary.
Ms. Owen, my question was about the numbers.
Yes, the numbers of early childhood centres have closed due to a positive COVID notification. So from the 1st of June forward, we have had notification of 314 early childhood centres closed due to a positive COVID case and 52 family daycare centres, so in total 366.
Ms. Owen, is that from the 1st of June this year?
1st of June this year to this week.
Do you have details on the numbers for the the whole of this crisis? I think Mr. Disdale gave numbers coming from 1 March last year in relation to schools. Do you have those numbers?
No, I'll have to take that one on notice.
With more than 350 childcare centres closing, how many centres have indicated to you that they are in such financial distress that they are likely to actually not reopen? What's the state of the sector, Ms. Owen?
Well, as Ms. Harrison said, we are talking very regularly to the sector, and I hear genuine concerns from the sector about the stress that they are under for a variety of reasons, from attendance rates, from participation, from workforce stresses, and we are working with them to ascertain what support we can give them. As far as we have been actually notified, only 3 services have notified us that they do not intend to reopen.
Ms. Owen, given that there have been outbreaks in some 300, or notifications and closures in some 350 odd early childhood centres, I assume you're taking steps to ensure that the staff in those centres have priority access to vaccination. Is that the case?
That is the case, Mr. Shoebridge, yes. As you might be aware, during the time we made vaccinations available to our teaching population in the LGAs of concern, that offer was extended to early childhood staff in the same LGAs. And as we move forward, as we prioritise teaching and school workforce, early childhood workforce will be included in those prioritisations, including the Kudos Arena vaccination prioritisation that Ms. Harrison mentioned earlier. We recognise the importance of the early childhood workforce in looking after children across New South Wales.
So the early childhood workforce will be included both in the week of priority access for teachers and also in the day at the Kudos Stadium, is that right?
In all offers to school workforce in terms of vaccine prioritisation, early childhood workforce will be included.
What's the current rate of vaccination amongst the early childhood workforce?
So I think the committee would appreciate we do not employ the early childhood workforce and do not have available to us information in relation to their vaccination status. I would reiterate, I think that even in those LGAs of concern, our early childhood services have remained open, and that the number of cases in those areas reflects the fact that they have been open. And we are strongly encouraging staff and have been for a number of weeks to get vaccinated. We provided priority access to vaccinations in South West Sydney. We're extending that prioritisation for a week at Kudos Bank Arena from the 6th of September.
So from the 8th of November, it will be mandatory for teachers to be vaccinated. I'm assuming that includes teachers across all systems, government and non-government, is that correct?
That is correct. It is a requirement for all teachers in all settings.
Given we've had some 350 early childhood centres closing because of COVID, is the same directive going to be issued in relation to early childhood workers?
So firstly, I would note there is already a mandatory vaccination requirement in place for early childhood workers in those 12 LGAs of concern. And yes, that is being extended to the whole workforce.
Have you, within the New South Wales Department, sorry, I'll start again, is that from the same date, the 8th of November?
Yes, from the same date.
Are there arrangements in place if teachers have an adverse reaction to vaccination that they will have paid leave or access to workers' compensation from the department?
So I will refer to Ms. Catcher on this matter. I would note that it is an emerging area of legal consideration, and Ms. Catcher might be able to provide some further detail.
Thanks, Secretary. Thanks for the question, Mr. Shoebridge. So I'll take it in 2 sections because you've raised the liability issue in terms of the insurance. So just so I'm clear on the question, but you've also raised the issue about people taking sick leave or leave if they have an adverse reaction. So recently the department, on the first piece around leave, the department issued guidance to employees to say that in order to facilitate their vaccination, there was 2 hours of special leave available. There's also other flexible leave that people can take to go and get vaccinated. If they were to have an adverse reaction to a vaccination, they obviously have sick leave available to do that as well. In relation to the issue about public liability, as the Secretary indicated, this is new terrain. I think all agencies across New South Wales Government are very much seeking guidance, looking at the health advice, considering the risk, getting legal advice on these issues. The issue of public liability is a matter for, in many respects, with relation to insurance.
Oh, Ms. Catcher, I just want to, it's a simple question. If teachers are required to be vaccinated for their work and then have an adverse reaction and it's any kind of significant health issue, will they be protected? Will they be protected under either workers' compensation or under other departmental policies? It's a very simple question.
Yes, and I was actually getting to the answer, but I just needed to explain some context, Mr. Shoebridge. So just to polish that off or finalise the question, the answer to the question rather, they would be able to apply for workers' compensation. The issue of how that claim is determined and the liability questions, that is a matter for iCare.
All right, so the department hasn't got advice and you can't tell teachers that if there's an adverse reaction, they'll be covered. You're not in a position to do that. You say you can make an application, but whatever happens to that application is a matter for iCare.
Mr. Shoebridge, that's not what I'm saying. You asked me to give you a view about liability, and I'm respectfully just simply pointing out that I don't know what iCare is going to decide or determine in relation to that. I absolutely want to make it clear that, of course, the department will look after its staff. Of course, the department will take claims if there's an adverse reaction to a vaccination. Those are general matters that we take very seriously, but I cannot make a determination as to how iCare is going to treat.
I'm not asking you to be iCare. We'll move on. Ms. Harrison, one of the key indicators under your school success model is attendance. Is that right?
That is correct, yes.
Can you tell me what the attendance rates have been for schools during this lockdown period or during last year's lockdown period?
So certainly Mr. Disdale will be able to give you a breakdown. We have in place additional monitoring of attendance given the relation, given we have students learning from home. And so Mr. Disdale will be able to provide you with some further detail on that.
Thanks, Secretary. Mr. Shoebridge, what I can indicate to you is at the moment, and this has been quite stable, 95% of our students across New South Wales in public schools are learning from home. In the priority LGAs, the 12 priority LGAs, Mr. Shoebridge, 98% of our students are learning from home. If you want me to give you a breakdown for primary and secondary, I can. For primary schools, it is about 8% of our student population that are on site. For our secondary schools, it's about 1% of our student population that are on site. And for our special schools, it's about 13% of our student population that are on site.
Thank you, Mr. Disdale. Mr. Disdale, at Public Accountability Committee hearing, you told us you had no visible data on the number of kids who are online at any point.
David,
can you tell us what this attendance, 95%
Wes,
attendance
you're on.
David,
Mr. Shoebridge, your time has expired.
Mr. Shoebridge, your time has expired. I'm sorry. It's now time for the opposition and Ms. Houssos.
Thanks very much. Ms. Harrison, in terms of the teacher survey of vaccinations, did casual teachers participate in that survey?
I'll ask Ms. Catcher to provide details of who was asked to contribute to the survey.
Thanks, Ms. Houssos. Thanks, Secretary. I believe so, but I will confirm that and take it on notice.
Would you be able to come back to us today if possible?
I'll endeavour to do that, Ms. Houssos.
Thanks very much. Ms. Harrison, I just wanted to come back to the question of the criteria for students learning at home or learning at face-to-face at school. You have said that it will be at the moment local government areas of concern will be the criteria for students learning at home. You also talked about the CDC requirement, 50 cases per 100,000 population. Now, I've just had a quick look, that's over a 14-day period. With some rough calculations, that would actually, at the current rates, mean that the children in Burwood, which is a local government area of concern, actually don't meet that CDC criteria, but students in Camden do. They actually have over 100 cases per 100,000 people in the community. Will this be an additional requirement on top of the local government areas of concern, or will it simply be the local government areas of concern?
So for clarity for the committee and the community, can I say that there's a number of factors at play here. So first, if you are in a community and a stay-at-home order is lifted, you may return to school fully. If you are in a community where stay-at-home orders remain and you are not an LGA of concern, the staged return to school will occur. If you live in an LGA that is an LGA of concern and remains an LGA of concern, we will not be returning to face-to-face learning in those LGAs until the public health order changes and they are removed from being LGAs of concern. That is based on the health advice, and health are the institution that determine and provide advice to government on whether areas should remain local government areas of concern.
And when you say a staged return, does that mean a full-time return from the 25th of October or the 1st of November or the 8th of November?
So for Kindy and Year 1, it is a staged return from the 25th of October. We will be providing schools with flexibility to stagger their start time and pick-up times to minimise mixing and mingling between cohorts and between adults at the school gate. And then from the subsequent weeks, those additional year groups will be able to return.
So that is full-time learning?
It's expected to be close to full-time learning with those caveats that I just provided around the flexibility provided to schools to stagger their start and finish times accordingly.
So let me be clear, it will be 5 days a week with staggered start and finish times.
Correct, yes.
Okay. And sorry, we talked about the local government areas of concern. Yeah, of course, Mr. D'Adam.
Look, I just wanted to clarify, Ms. Harrison, in terms of the vaccine mandate. So that's all sectors, that's correct?
That's correct.
And it's the whole workforce, it's not just teachers.
It's the whole workforce, yes. It's anyone who is working in and around students. As I said, I've said from the beginning of this hearing, the best protection we can provide for the youngest people in our community is for the adults to get vaccinated. And we think, and along with health, we think that's a really important prerequisite for the safe opening of schools.
So just on that point, I want to come back to the issue that Mr. Shoebridge raised about adverse reactions and casual employees. So casual employees are going to be mandated to seek a vaccine, to be vaccinated. They can often work across sectors. Where does the workers' compensation liability, how is that going to work in terms of workers' compensation? Who's actually liable in relation to an adverse reaction in that circumstance? What advice would the department provide in relation to the impact for casual teachers?
So can I just clarify the question, Mr. D'Adam? You are asking how would the adverse reaction to receiving a vaccination be considered under work health and safety and provisions for staff, given the great number of staff? Yeah, okay, I will ask.
Mandate, they're required to do it for their work. They have an adverse reaction. It might even be a mild one. They might be out of, unable to work for a couple of days. Who do they lodge a workers' compensation claim with in that circumstance?
So I would ask Ms. Catcher to respond. I would just flag that we are in an evolving area and that we will, of course, be referring claims in the public system through to iCare, and Ms. Catcher can provide some further information.
Thank you, Secretary. Thanks, Mr. D'Adam. Ms. Houssos, I have confirmation that casuals were part of that vaccination survey, if that's of assistance. Thank you. Mr. D'Adam, in relation to your question, when a casual teacher is asked to get vaccinated under a public health order, it would follow that if there's an adverse reaction to that, that they would be able to avail themselves of a compensation scheme. That is my understanding. As the Secretary noted, this is new terrain, and I think we would need to take on notice the decisions that arise as a consequence of that. But that would generally be broadly in line with the expectation that follows from a mandatory vaccination.
I appreciate that, but obviously there's a time frame here, and so there's going to be casual teachers who are needing that advice in a very short period if they're going to go out and seek vaccination, and could be facing this situation tomorrow, perhaps.
So, Mr. D'Adam, we'd certainly appreciate that, and we're working very closely with health, and you'll also understand that with other professions, having had mandated vaccinations, this is not only an issue in education. I would also note that the number of people who have an adverse reaction to either vaccination is very low at this time, and so I hope that this small level of uncertainty isn't enough to put anyone off getting vaccinated at this time. It is in their interests, it is in their families' interests, and it is in the students that they want to work with's interest that they access a vaccination. So I hear your question, and we'll certainly take on notice and come back with any detail as soon as we are able.
I wanted to come back to an issue that Mr. Shoebridge raised around the health advice on potential risks, and I suppose under work health and safety obligations, those obligations are still in place, irrespective of the overarching public health framework. Don't you have an obligation where you've identified a risk to consult with workers about how you're going to manage that risk? And I suppose, while it's not explicitly clear in the work health and safety legislation, don't you also have an obligation to consult with parents in terms of the health and safety of their children? How are you consulting with parents?
And so I'll ask Ms. Catcher to provide some further information on that. I would firstly give some context to that question. We have been engaging with our staff regularly throughout this pandemic. We have responded to the questions they have raised with us, both to me personally, to colleagues on this call, and more generally through a number of channels, and we continue to do that. We have also been heartened by the strong and positive feedback we've received from parents in relation to their learning from home experience, with the majority of them expressing significant confidence in the learning from home support that's been provided by our schools. And I would flag that in these unprecedented times, we have to take what is a reasonable and practical steps to ensure the work health and safety of our staff when we are also living through a once in 100-year pandemic. That is what we are seeking to do. We are putting in place a level of protection that is at or higher than any other jurisdiction in the world. We are doing that because we think it is really important. We have looked at the international best practice, and we have ensured that we have followed that in every one of our restrictions that we have in place to secure that safety in our school communities. And I'll let Ms. Catcher ask the specific elements of your consultation question.
Thanks, Secretary. It's a really important question, Mr. D'Adam. I would reiterate everything that the Secretary has said there. I'd also probably point out a nuance that there is in relation to consultation. So if it is a mandated vaccination rather than a direction from the employer, so this would be a mandated vaccination like we saw, the likes of which we saw in the construction industry, the consultation is very much focused on how we can minimise risk, how we can provide ways for teachers that would fall within an exemption to operate in that system, how we can advise schools how to operationalise all of the issues that flow from that order within school settings in a COVID-safe way.
Oh, so I'll reiterate my question, which is about consultation with parents. I mean, I'll go back to you, Ms. Harrison. You've indicated earlier about parents, have a desire to return the kids to school, but obviously there's safety concerns there. But I don't really see where you're actively engaging with parents, and perhaps you could address that question. How are you engaging with parents on these issues?
So firstly, our schools are engaged with their parents regularly on a variety of issues, including the well-being of their students. We've seen that on show throughout this period, as well as for extended periods of time before, in relation to those families who have continued to send their children to school during these times because they have needed to. There is regular communication between the school community and the school in relation to those matters. Obviously, as we look towards the 25th of October, schools will be having dialogue with their communities in relation to the return to school plans, and that will continue through to the 25th of October and beyond. We recognise that there is a lot of anxiety in the broad community at the moment. That is there for parents and non-parents alike. These are unprecedented times, and our schools are there to support their communities, and they've been doing an exceptional job of doing so throughout this period. But that consultation will continue right up until the 25th of October and beyond, as parents will share their concerns with their school community, with their principal, and directly with us.
I have one more question, then I'm going to hand over to my colleague. I wanted to ask, in the press conference, there was mention around discussions that had occurred with the university sector, and I wondered whether you could elaborate, whoever's, perhaps you, Ms. Harrison, or Mr. Martin, in terms of the nature of those assurances that have been provided by the university sector.
Certainly, I'll ask Mr. Martin to comment. I would just flag that if we were not necessarily able to watch the press conference, so we probably won't comment on specifics that were raised there, but Mr. Martin can certainly ask a question around the engagement NHSA has had with the university sector and the support for our HSC students this year.
So NHSA, the chair of NHSA, Professor Peter Shergold, who happens to be the Chancellor of Western Sydney University, has convened meetings between myself and him and Vice Chancellors. We've also met with UAC on a number of occasions. I believe that there will be press releases issued by universities today indicating their support for HSC students, given that there will be some delay to the publication of exam results. So we have assurances that the universities will be able to take into account this year's HSC to make sure those students feel safe and comfortable if they wish to go to university in 2022.
Are you able to provide a little bit more detail in terms of the nature of what the universities are proposing to do?
Well, the university's admission centre, UAC, basically use HSC data to turn that into an ATAR. Really, it's a timeline issue. Can they get the data from NHSA and turn it into an ATAR and provide university offers in a suitable time for students to feel that they're ready to go in 2022? So it's just about whether their capacity to deal with our data, given that it'll be slightly later in its release.
And Mr. D'Adam, if I could add, the advice we received from UAC indicated that following last year's experience in Victoria, UAC have continued to work on contingency plans to support the admissions process for university through the COVID pandemic, and that they've certainly been doing that and are ready to respond to us and the situation here in New South Wales accordingly.
Okay, I'll hand over to Ms. Houssos now.
Thanks very much. Ms. Harrison, I wanted to ask you about, you've talked about a week of access to vaccinations for teachers. That's obviously going to be largely for teachers in Greater Sydney. What are you doing to allow regional teachers access to vaccinations now that it will be mandatory? They've only got about 2 weeks to actually make that deadline that you've announced today.
So firstly, I would flag that our teachers have more than 2 weeks to meet that deadline. I think it's really important for our teachers that they understand the opportunities available to them. The current requirement between vaccinations of the Pfizer vaccine is 3 weeks, and for the AstraZeneca vaccine is 4 weeks. So there is ample opportunity between now and the 25th of October. I would also add that New South Wales Health and the state government is only responsible for part of the vaccine rollout. GPs and pharmacists, the particularly through the Commonwealth, in terms of the GP network, are also providing vaccines. The Commonwealth has made more vaccines available for 19 to 39-year-olds, 16 to 39-year-olds to now book in through their GP from next week for access to Pfizer. So overall, the access to vaccine across the community and across the state is increasing. We will, of course, monitor the vaccination rates in regions carefully between now and then. We'll be working with New South Wales Health and seeking support from the Commonwealth to ensure that all of our school workforce can get access to the vaccinations they need.
But you can understand a number of regional teachers who had their vaccinations actually cancelled to allow HSC students to be vaccinated have now found out that they will be required to have vaccinations as well, but they're still waiting.
I certainly can understand the frustration of any community member in the regions, and of course I would seek to support our teachers in that as far as we are able to do so. The vaccine programme and those decisions to reallocate vaccines were not made by the Department of Education, and therefore it wouldn't be appropriate for me to comment on those specifically. I do understand the frustration people are feeling. I do also acknowledge that those vaccines were returned to the regions, and as my understanding at this time is that those vaccination bookings have been remade. So I do hope for all our teachers that they are able to access a vaccine that's appropriate for them. I asked them to seek medical advice on which vaccine is appropriate for them. And we will, of course, support getting vaccines to our school workforce across the state with our New South Wales Health colleagues.
Ms. Harrison, what options will be available for parents who decide to keep their children learning at home after the 25th of October?
Thank you for the question. Obviously, there will be limitations to what we can provide in terms of both in-person and at-home learning. This will be a situation we need to monitor very closely. We do have and will continue to have support available from the Department of Education. I referenced earlier the guided learning resources that we have available through our website, and Ms. Owen might be able to provide some further information on those for you.
Yes, thank you, Ms. Houssos. It's really important that all parents feel supported by the department in terms of supporting their children in learning from home. So we have made available all our learning resources on our public website, have run webinars for parents to make sure they understand the resources that are available and the support that they have to support the education of their children at home. That will continue after the 25th of October. All those resources continue to be available. As Ms. Harrison refers to, we've been developing a week-by-week pack for parents and teachers to keep up with the lessons that they could be running at home, the sort of materials, whether that's online or printed materials they can run through with their children, including some wellbeing activities to make sure they're looking after the social and emotional wellbeing of their children and the educational needs. Those all will remain available for parents after the time we start to return to schooling face-to-face.
So, Ms. Harrison, you're probably aware that several provinces in Canada have actually given parents the option of online learning for the new year, for the new school year there. They can actually opt for in-person or at-home learning. Are you looking for a similar system here in New South Wales?
So we are certainly looking to ensure that we can support parents no matter what their choices are here. We will be doing that in a way that ensures our current teachers who will be returning to face-to-face learning, I'm sure you'll appreciate the importance of this, Ms. Houssos, we want to make sure they're only asked to do one job, and that job will be to teach the students in front of them. Certainly at departmental level and through other channels, we will be looking to provide every support we can to parents. But we are going to be encouraging to our teachers and our parents and our communities that when we meet these thresholds in line with broader community settings, that we think that face-to-face learning is the best opportunity for their student, for their child, and that it balances the risk in the community with the educational needs, social, mental well-being needs of our students.
Let me be clear, I'm certainly not implying that teachers should be doing remote learning and also teaching in class. That is just
Yes,
That
so
is
I just wanted to make sure I
huge.
clarified that. I wouldn't want our
Yeah,
teachers to hear that and think we were asking them to do 2 jobs. I'm sure you'll appreciate we wanted
No,
to.
I'm asking about what the department, what the support the department that will provide for parents. And if you're looking
to, I'm just going to interrupt you there because the opposition's time has expired at this point. Now, Mr. Latham has been unable to rejoin us at the moment. So what I will do is pass the questioning back over to Mr. Shoebridge for the crossbench. And then should Mr. Latham return, I will direct the questioning to him.
If I see him come back, I'll hand it over myself, Mr. Deputy Chair. Ms. Katchia, your answers to my colleague, Mr. D'Adam, about coverage if teachers are required to be vaccinated and have an adverse reaction, did I understand you to say that you would expect they would be covered under workers' compensation?
If they are acting under a public health order in the course of their employment, yes.
Well, Ms. Katchia, I firmly believe that should be the law, and I want to be clear about that. But unfortunately, the advice publicly issued by iCare as recently as this week doesn't say that. Are you aware of iCare's advice?
I'm not aware of their advice in relation to that cohort of people.
Don't you think that would be important to be aware of the advice given by iCare before you make statements like that in budget estimates, and also before you give that what may actually be false confidence to teachers that they will be covered?
So, Mr. Shoebridge, just before Ms. Katchia replies, I think she's been quite clear. iCare have not given us advice at this point in relation to the vaccination of teachers. So she said she was in terms of the cohort currently being considered. So I just want to make sure that we have clarity in what has been said. Ms. Katchia, you might like to respond.
Thank you, Secretary. Mr. Shoebridge, I'm not trying to duck and weave the question, nor am I trying to mislead anybody. I'm simply saying, as the Secretary said earlier, these are untraversed, uncharted waters. I am not part of iCare. I do not set their advice. I have not been given the advice to date on the cohort that you mention. I'm not sure whether the advice covers casual teachers or whether it's just general advice. So I'm simply saying that I have a view, but that is my personal view. We will have to wait for the advice, Mr. Shoebridge, in order to be able to answer that question with certainty.
And Mr.
I might just assist here and tell you what iCare say. They say that, and I'm reading from their fact sheet published just this week, the link between the vaccine injury and the worker's employment is easier to establish where a worker is influenced by their employer's requirement to get vaccinated or is subject to a New South Wales public health order. In these circumstances, there is an increased likelihood of the vaccine injury being covered under workers' compensation. Ms. Katchia, that is a long way from a guarantee, isn't it?
I don't think, Mr. Shoebridge, I don't think what I said is at odds with the advice that you have just read out.
And so, Mr. Shoebridge, could I, in terms of, we really want to provide assistance to the committee in this matters, and of course we want to make sure that our teachers understand the issues. That is the advice iCare have currently provided. As and when we receive updated advice, we'd be very happy to share that with the community, with this committee on notice, and of course we'll be communicating it out to our teachers.
You say that's the advice iCare provided. I'm reading to you from a fact sheet that I'm now telling you about. Are you saying that you have some advice from iCare in addition to that, or that's consistent with advice iCare have given you, or have you just heard about it now?
So we were aware that ICAC had released some information in relation to the work health and safety compensation issues related to mandated vaccinations. You have just read that from a statement of a fact sheet from ICAC. I don't have that in front of me, but I agree that it is in line with the advice that I have received on the matter. I would suggest that the most useful thing for the committee here and for our staff is for us to continue those conversations with iCare around this issue now that we know that teachers are going to be required to be vaccinated, and to provide that certainty and clarity back to the committee as soon as we have it.
Is it true that PricewaterhouseCoopers has been engaged to develop a mid-career entry model for teachers? by the department?
Thank you for the question. So the committee would be aware that the government announced its plans to co-design a mid-career entry route for teachers into the teaching profession earlier this year. That is a specific programme that we are currently working through with stakeholders to design, and Ms. Catcher can provide you with further details on the specifics of your question.
Thank you, Secretary. Thanks for the question, Mr. Shoebridge. You will have seen recently the government announced that we are looking at ways to develop a mid-career program as part of a teacher supply strategy. We are working with PwC because, as you can imagine, in a system of our size, we want to make sure that we are coordinating an approach that takes account of a really wide range of stakeholders, looks at best practice across the world, and coordinates that in parallel with the department.
So you have engaged PricewaterhouseCoopers to do the work with the department on this mid-career entry work? The answer is yes. Is that what I'm to understand from those two long responses? Yes.
Mr. Shoebridge, it could be that PricewaterhouseCoopers is working on a piece around attraction to teaching, and is also talking to us and working with us on the mid-career piece.
I don't understand what you mean by could be. I'm asking you what PricewaterhouseCoopers is doing for the department, and what do you mean by could be? I don't understand.
Mr. Shoebridge, I believe I've answered the question. I'm not trying to be difficult. I'm trying to answer your question. I'm not sure what the context of the question is. It would assist me if you could provide that.
I've just asked a simple question. Has PricewaterhouseCoopers been engaged by the department for the work on the mid-career entry into the profession?
And I said,
yes.
I answered Mr. Shoebridge that they are working with us in the initial phases of a mid-career entry point for teachers as part of the supply strategy.
How much are they being paid?
I'll have to check and take it on notice for now, but I'll come back and indicate the exact figure in a moment.
And how many PwC staff are working? And do any of them have education experience, in which case, how many of them have education experience?
So, Mr. Shoebridge, I think Ms. Catcher will take those elements on notice. I would like to say that leading our school workforce directorate in the department is Mark Barakat, who is an experienced educator, former primary principal. That throughout the department and throughout that directorate,
Harrison, please, we don't have a lot of time, Ms. Harrison, and long digressions that go beyond the question are really not helpful.
I'm trying to digress. I'm trying to assure the committee, based on your line of questioning, that we have the profession informing our work on the development of
Ms. Harrison, I'm asking about the consultants that you're paying for. And I really think it's unfortunate when you try to hijack the hearings for your own, for additions like that. It's not helpful.
Mr. Shoebridge, you did ask a question, and I note that it was directed not to Ms. Harrison, but Ms. Harrison has elected to take it and is providing you an answer to that question. I just ask you to allow her a little bit more leeway to provide that answer before you interrupt her.
But Chair, the answer is unresponsive. I asked about specific questions about the consultants from PricewaterhouseCoopers, and Ms. Harrison's answer is not responsive to that.
I believe Ms. Harrison was getting to the point where she was responding directly to your question.
Thank you. So I appreciate the opportunity to answer, and I understand your frustrations, Mr. Shoebridge, with the limited amount of time to ask questions. PricewaterhouseCoopers are assisting us in relation to some strategic advice on our overall workforce strategy. They are working with and alongside professionals in the department who are providing insights from the teacher workforce.
How much did the department spend on consultants last financial year? And how many different projects are there currently where the department is working with consultants at the moment?
Yeah, thanks for the question. We spend a very small proportion of our budget on consultants. I believe that in the financial year 20 to 21, it was around 0.03% of our budget. Mr. Withy will be able to give you the specific figures on the total amounts.
Thank you, Secretary, and thanks for the question, Mr. Shoebridge. So the total value of consultancy arrangements in the 2020 calendar year, as we report in our annual report, was $4.96 million. As Ms. Harrison says, that is 0.03 of our total budget over that period, 0.03%, sorry. I think you also asked the question about the number of engagements that's encompassed. That was 39 total engagements.
Thanks, Mr. Withy. And the question you may not be able to answer now, but how many current projects are there where consultants are engaged? And if you do take it on notice, what the contract value for that is?
I will have to take that on notice.
Thanks, Mr. Withy. Ms. Harrison, the department had a target of 20% reduction of the administrative burden on teachers by 2022. Are you going to achieve that target by 2022?
Thank you for the question. We are working hard across the department to reduce the administrative burden. The Minister has made clear her expectations and the government's expectations for that target to be achieved. We have been putting in place, obviously current circumstances have disrupted all of the way education is delivered across the state, and we've supported our teachers directly in that delivery of that provision with guided learning packages provided online to take that workload and burden off our teachers where we can. And Mr. Withy can give you some further advice on our plans to achieve that target.
So thank you, Secretary. And again, thanks for the question, Mr. Shoebridge. The reduction of the administrative burden in our schools is a really core component of the school success model. It's one of the key work streams. It's one of the work streams that we hear most regularly from our colleagues in schools, our principals, our teachers, and our administrative staff about the importance of that. As you alluded to in your question, we have set very clear targets in respect of that reduction, 20% reduction for teachers and principals by 2022. And those targets are now firmly embedded within the performance agreements of every executive across the department as we all lean into that effort. You asked whether we are on track. We believe we are on track at the moment. As Ms. Harrison says, there has been some disruptions over the past few months in terms of the rollout of particular initiatives, and in terms of some of the efforts we were making to track some of those administrative burdens within the school environment, as we've been unable to attend school and support those efforts. We have realised really significant benefits already, particularly in relation to principals, which has been the early focus of this piece, with an estimated 115 hours a year saved. We have more to do on the teacher side, and we recognise that, and that is absolutely the focus for the work that is happening within the team at the moment.
To reduce the teachers' admin workload by 20% would be a 40 hours a year reduction. The last time the department reported in terms of the so-called success of this program, there was less than 5 minutes a week being saved by teachers. Can you tell me what the current saving is? Are you anywhere near 40 hours a year?
Well, so I don't recognise those figures. I think they assume calculations that I'm not privy to. But in terms of the targets, I'm very happy to talk to how we have calculated those targets around the 20% reduction. As you say, that equates to 40 hours of reduction every year. That's based on an OECD TALIS survey, which suggested that teachers spend around 4.1 hours a week on general admin tasks. It's worth being clear here about what we mean when we talk about administrative tasks, because
Mr. Withy, rather than a long digression on this and a definitional argument, I just simply want to know that you agree with me it's 40 hours a year reduction. What have you achieved?
Well, so as I said in my previous answer, we are working across both principals and teachers at the moment. We've delivered 50 systems and process improvements over the last 3 years. As I said in my previous answer, we recognise that many of those responses in the early phase were aimed more squarely at principals, but we have in 2021 delivered a number of improvements for our teachers as well. We've
What's the hour? You have a target. What's the point of a target if you can't report on it? You're meant to reduce 40 hours of admin work a year, and I'm asking you where you're up to, and I don't get a single number. What is the point of a target if you can't report on it, given it's meant to be in place in a few months' time in 2022?
Mr. Shoebridge, I would just like to say that when I talk to teachers across our system and I talk to our principal, the thing they have asked most strongly for in relation to relieving the burden from them is additional support from the department. I would just like to flag that that's absolutely what we have been providing, particularly through this pandemic, but more so in relation to the professional development and the quality of the professional development the department has been offering, the support provided by directors, educational leadership to their schools. We are looking at all of the ways that we can support our staff.
Chair, Ms. Harrison's answer is now non-responsive, and I'd ask you to draw her to order.
Mr. Shoebridge, I believe Ms. Harrison was coming to the point, and what I'll do is I should give her a little bit more opportunity just to provide the response and come to a direct answer for you.
Remembering the question was about where they are in terms of getting to the 40-hour reduction and where they are on the target and a number.
So thank you, Chair, and thank you, Mr. Shoebridge. I would note the 40-hour target is your number based on figures that I don't have in front of me, and I think Mr. Withy mentioned that and pointed to that. We are very happy to provide on notice further details of our plans and progress in relation to that target.
Ms. Harrison, the 40 hours is the department's figure. You're not aware of that? The 40 hours is the department's figure. You weren't aware of that?
The previous conversation related to your description of that target in minutes, Mr. Shoebridge. That was the number I was querying.
I'm not disagreeing. You and I are not disagreeing. The 40 hours is the department's target. You and I agree on that, at least, don't we? 40 hours is the department's target.
In terms of progress towards that target, we recognise, as I've said, that we've got more to do in that space. We are. Your question about what the purpose of a target was if we're not going to report against that is, I think, unfair. I think we are clearly going to report against that. That is why we have created that target to report against it. We've got more to do to work in the teacher space. I don't have a number for you today, Mr. Shoebridge. I think we are probably about a quarter of the way there, but we're happy to come back with some more detail on that on notice.
I just want to make the point, that if people talk over each other, it makes it really hard for Hansard to transcribe it with the WebEx. So I will just ask if people ask the question and then allow witnesses to finalise their response.
Thanks, Chair. Point well made. Ms. Harrison, you say that when you talk to teachers now, they give you a lot of feedback. When I talk to teachers now, they are telling me about how their work hours have massively increased. They never seem to have enough hours in the day. All of the online care, the care for students' well-being, the lesson preparation, their hours have expanded and expanded and expanded this year. Are you keeping track on what the hours are of your workforce, what hours they're putting in a week?
So firstly, Mr. Shoebridge, I would note that our teachers have always worked exceptionally hard. They are incredibly committed professionals and they do an exceptional job. We are, of course, regularly seeking feedback from our staff in relation to their workload. I joined a statewide staff room just yesterday of science head teachers across the state and talked about a number of issues, in particular, the ways that they were supporting students with assessment tasks in the HSC and the workload that had placed on them in relation to the changes that we have had to put in place for the HSC. This is really important work for us here in the department. We all know the most important work teachers do is with their students every day. We are committed to making sure that they have more time to spend doing the thing that they signed up for, that they want to be doing every day. And we are doing that through a number of ways. We are providing additional support to our teachers. We are providing additional curriculum support. We are providing additional learning materials, particularly for this learning from home period. And we will continue to provide that support and build upon it. I can assure you, Mr. Shoebridge, I want nothing more than our teachers to be able to say to me that they are loving their work and they are doing the thing that they signed up to do as professionals in our system. That is what we will be continuing to work towards.
Now, Ms. Harrison, if you could answer my question, what is the current workload of teachers? Have you made any efforts to work out what the number of hours teachers are working now? Because the reports that have come through to my office and I'm sure to many other MPs, is that teachers' workload has massively increased. Are you tracking it? What's the number?
So we don't have a specific tracking mechanism for working hours. We obviously have management structures in place throughout our system where teachers are able to engage with their line managers in schools around their workload if they are struggling with that. I note that a number of external reports commissioned by the likes of the Teachers Federation have given comment on this issue. I think Mr. Withy has clearly articulated that we have a strong focus in relation to this issue and that we want to see our teachers spending the time doing the thing that they chose this vocation in order to do.
How many hours a week are they working?
I'll allow that last question.
So as I said in my previous answer, we do not have specific data on the hours per week worked by a teacher at this time. I'm happy to take on notice, providing any further information that we do have in the department on that issue. But at the moment, we do not have, our teachers are not required to clock in and out in relation to their employment.
Mr. Shoebridge, your time has expired. We've now got a few minutes left, so I'll pass to Mr. D'Adam for 4 minutes, and then Mr. Shoebridge, you can have the questioning again.
Mr. Martin, you'd be well aware that the educational landscape is not an equitable one, and that the areas of southwest Sydney and Western Sydney are areas of particular disadvantage, and given that those areas are also the areas that have been subjected to more stringent lockdown requirements. Have you or NESA made special representations to the universities for special consideration for those HSC students in those areas that have been subject to the greater restrictions in relation to how their applications to university admission might be treated with some special consideration?
Thank you for the question, Mr. D'Adam. Yes, we have. The first thing, though, we've done is to try and make sure that the students' disadvantage is taken into account in terms of the results they get. And that's why we've allowed for the second year and expanded it somewhat, teachers to mark the major works, the performances, the oral language tasks, because they know best what disadvantage has been faced by those students, particularly in the LGAs that have been locked down quite hard for a long period of time. So the first thing I would argue that we're doing to try and address the question you've raised is to give the students the best chance of producing a result that most approximates what they would have received had not COVID occurred. But in terms of the specifics of your answer, yes, we've had, as I said, meetings with, in one of your previous questions, UAC, Vice Chancellors and DVCs around how they might accommodate the specifics of the particular students that are most disadvantaged. There's a range of early offers going out to schools. I think that some of our universities, I was talking to Professor Shergold as recently as yesterday, are sending out a range of, he's from the Chancellor of University of Western Sydney, that obviously has candidature of a lot of the students in the lockdown areas. So they're sending out and being encouraged to provide appropriate early offers that take into account disadvantage. But the universities run those processes themselves, but we are in dialogue to try and advocate on behalf of the students as much as we possibly can, given what they've gone through this year.
Thanks. I have
Ms. Harrison.
Oh, sorry.
Ms. Harrison, I'm going to return to this question about local government areas of concern. They are home to more people than the city of Perth, and yet they didn't rate a mention in today's press release. How will students in the local government areas of concern, if they attend school outside of those areas, will they be allowed to attend? And what about vice versa? If a student lives outside of a local government area of concern, but attend school inside of a local government area of concern, will they be allowed to attend school?
Thanks for the question, Ms. Houssos. We're aware of the issues that are created by boundaries within a mobile city like Sydney in relation to LGA areas. Ms. Owen will be able to provide you with some further detail on that.
Yeah, and again, I recognise, Ms. Houssos, the context and the question that you raise. These are, a large number of important students who we want to get back to face-to-face schooling as soon as we can. We can only do so when the health advice allows us to do so. So at the moment, students who either live or study in those LGAs are required to learn from home, and we will be awaiting health advice on the conditions by which that advice changes.
And what about
Thank
if
you
the
very much.
student?
Ms. Houssos, my apologies. Your time has expired. Mr. Shoebridge, you've got 4 minutes.
Oh, thanks, Chair. Ms. Martin, I'd like to go back to this issue about how the obvious disadvantage for those students in Western and Southwestern Sydney, especially for the HSC, is going to be taken into account. Is that going to be taken into account if the lockdown continues in a form of scaling advantage? How will it be taken into account?
The specifics of the moderation and the scaling I will provide on notice, because I'm not a psychometrician, but what we're doing is by allowing the teachers to mark their own students' work against marking rubrics and advice that we provide, we are, as we did last year, getting the teachers to provide marks that fall within a reasonable band for the expectation of that student had not COVID occurred. It's a difficult task, but it's been done, as I said, last year, and it's done in Victoria and other parts. We then scale against the exams that they sit for those particular subjects. We have specific other illness misadventure procedures for those students who are disadvantaged on the day or before the exam. And there may well be the opportunity to do more, given the nature of the situation. I would just make the point that last year we were able to provide processes because the lockdown was the same lockdown across the whole state of New South Wales. In this particular case, we've got all parts of New South Wales in different areas of disadvantage, lesser or greater. So our methodologies need to accommodate the differences in the lockdown. I'm confident that we will have the advice from the assessment experts and our own internal processes to make sure that we reduce the disadvantage as much as possible. But I'm not sure if that's answered your question, Mr. Shoebridge.
Ms. Martin, I think it's actually really helpful. Thank you. So there will be efforts made to have it, the adjustments based upon a locality basis. Is that going to be based upon the severity of the lockdown? Is that and the duration of the lockdown? Will they be two criteria?
So we've already put in practice or put in place any part of New South Wales that's been in a level 4 lockdown, which is now the whole state. But within that, there is a variability in relation to the disadvantage that the students have faced. So we're relying on the teachers and the principals to make the judgment about their own students in terms of the level of disadvantage faced in relation to the HSC, because we can't do that centrally.
But Mr. Martin, what we do know is that Western and Southwestern Sydney, those local government areas of concern, have faced this extreme disadvantage, a really heightened disadvantage as a result of the lockdown. Surely all the students in those areas deserve an allowance for that. And is that going to be factored in?
Look, I wouldn't comment particularly on that option. What we will factor in is what we need to and can do. Going back to the first part of your point, though, is that whole of cohort processes will be put in place. I don't want teachers or principals trying to make multiple applications for students when the whole school has been in a difficult position.
Oh, well, I think that would clearly be preferable. Can I just ask what kind of transparency there'll be on this, when students and the community will be able to see what the criteria are and see how it will apply?
Look, the transparency, we actually hold the processes of the HSC and the scaling processes, particularly something that's referred to as the cut scores, very close to us, because we don't want to publicise issues that can be used to game the system, I suppose, in the shortest possible way to describe it. We will provide as much advice and transparency as we can, given the processes that we put in place. But we're still working on, we've got, of course, ranges of people, including, as I said, senior psychometricians and assessment experts, and we're trying, our priority is to look after the kids, the young people who are most disadvantaged.
Mr.
Thanks,
Shoebridge,
Mr. Bartlett. I think
that's-
my time's expired. But can I just say this? I think particularly for those students in Western and Southwestern Sydney, the more advice you can provide on the record, the more comfort you can give to them and their schools and their communities, and the sooner it can happen, I think the better.
We'll take that as a comment. I've always wanted to say that. Thank you very much to all the government officials for your attendance today. The committee secretariat will be in touch in the near future regarding any questions you've taken on notice and any supplementary questions. That concludes our hearing for today. And if members could just wait online, we'll have a short deliberative. Thank you.
Thank you.